Your allies in the west have been defeated. Lady Dustin has taken her own life and Lord Ryswell flees for his homelands with my men in pursuit. You will receive no help from that quarter. Your war is done, the only thing left is to decide how it ends. You have it in your power to save hundreds of lives. Do that, keep some shred of honor, and I will be more lenient than you deserve. Surrender and some of you will be allowed to take the black as a mercy for their crimes. Mercy. Arnulf Karstark barked from his place at the back, to freeze our balls off at the wall. It is either that, Arnulf, or have your headless corpse twitching in the dirt as a poor feast for the crows. Ned declared. Arnulf flinched as the Lord of Winterfell cast his icy gaze over the group. Make no mistake, any of you, your lives are forfeit. Surrender now, spare the lives of your people and I may yet be merciful. Lord Stark looked at Roose Bolton. However, for you and your son Roose, there is only one just response to your crimes. Though, I give you my word, surrender and I will make it a quick, clean, death. Which is more than these traitors deserve. There was a pause. Arnold Karstark was looking questioningly at the Boltons, his face white with fear. A heavy-set man wearing a surcoat displaying a star-topped mountain, looked enraged at Lord Stark who was staring implacably at the group. Seconds passed. Amazingly Roose Bolton smiled. It was a thin, weak thing, an almost imperceptible twist of the man's face. A tempting offer, Lord Stark. But I am afraid we shall have to decline. Instead he nodded to a man behind him who spurred his mount forward carrying a saddlebag. I have a counter-offer for you. Harold glanced at Lord Stark. The Lord of Winterfell looked outwardly calm, though Harold knew the rage that must have been close to the surface. Here is our offer, Bolton continued. You, and your forces will retire to Winterfell. You will end this conflict and give your word of honor never to make war on us again. Instead, the lands of House Bolton, which included those of House Hornwood by marriage, House Karstark and House Whitehill are to be made independent regions within the north. They will no longer be subject to your rule nor of King Robb in the south. Arnulf here Bolton nodded at the wizened old man, will be made Lord of Carhold in place of his great-nephew, Haryon, who will be formally dispossessed. Do that, Lord Stark, and we will have peace. There was a moment of stunned silence. Harold could not see his face, but it looked as if Lord Stark was frozen in place like a statue. For a long minute no one said a word, the only sound was the cold northern wind and soft braying of the horses. Lord Stark finally broke the silence. You're mad, Roose. You've completely lost your mind. Whatever makes you think I would agree to such a thing? Not out of the goodness of your heart certainly. Lord Stark Bolton smiled again, though it was a cruel cold expression. I am not a fool. No, you'll do it to keep your son safe from harm. The Stark party were transfixed with shock. Harold felt his body grow taut. One of Sansa's brothers. My son. Lord Stark's voice was a shade weaker than it had been mere moments before. Indeed, Bolton said, watching Eddard Stark intently, your youngest, Rickon, to be precise. He was not killed at Winterfell by the Ironborn as was originally supposed. Instead he escaped the castle and travelled to Skagos with a lone wildling woman as protection. Skagos. Rumours of that wild barbarous island were known even in the Vale. Nothing but rapists and cannibals. Had the situation in the north got so bad that Skagos was considered a safe haven? Once we learned of his location, my son went with a force to retrieve him. Roose finished exchanging a look with Ramsay, who grinned with malice at Lord Eddard. I fear that the natives of that isle have no love for the Starks. They were happy to hand over the boy. Though the wilderling caused some problems. She was good sport. Ramsay spoke for the first time, his voice guttural and mean. She moaned like a whore when I entered her, and cried like a baby when I cut the skin from her body. Barbarian. Jasper Redfort spat. Wench was lucky, Ramsay sniffed. I could have had her fed to my dogs. Bitch killed 3 of my men. Bile rose in Harold's gut, but he kept his face set, as if made from the stones of the Eyrie itself. Fucking savages. I see your house has reacquainted itself with the practice of flaying. Lord Stark's voice was barely above a whisper. You shouldn't be surprised, my Lord, Bolton supplied. Tradition is an important part of northern custom. And if you don't want us to practice our tradition on your little boy, then I, respectfully, suggest that you agree to my terms. Lord Stark considered. How do I even know you speak the truth? he asked harshly, that you have my son? Roose Bolton turned to the man just behind, Damon. The man, a fair-haired, boyish-looking youth with a whip curled across his shoulder, let go of the reins of his horse and plunged a hand into the saddlebag he held in his lap. A few seconds later the hand emerged grasping the bloody head of an animal. Deftly, the man known as Damon, threw the head onto the ground in between the two parties. Harold looked down. The head was massive, too large and misshapen to be a human head, though it was hard to tell, there was so much blood and matted dirt. With a start, Harold realized that the dirt covering the head was not that at all. Fur. The head was that of a large wolf. Its pointy ears and long sagging tongue adding to the truth that this creature hadn't been human at all. It looks like the beast that King Robb keeps around him at all times. Harold's memory flashed of a conversation he had had with Sansa and Arya at Runestone, at which he had been told that the Stark children, even the bastard Jon Snow, had each had a direwolf pup to raise as their own. The first direwolves south of the Wall for generations. Sansa had told him, with tears in her eyes, that her wolf, Lady, had been killed on the orders of Cersei Lannister. Arya had recounted how she had been forced to release own wolf, Nymeria, into the wild to escape the Queen's vengeance. As far as the girls knew, only the wolves belonging to Lord Eddard's sons survived. Now there is one less. Harold expected Lord Stark to rage at the Boltons. To threaten a child is beyond contempt. Instead, the Lord of Winterfell merely cast a sad look at the wolf's head before returning his eyes to the party in front of him. So you propose that we grant you independence in exchange for my son? Bolton shifted in his saddle. Not quite, my lord. Whatever makes you think I would give up such a valuable prize? You value your son too cheaply. No, no, young Rickon will remain at the Dread Fort as my guest, my ward even, for the foreseeable future. To guarantee your good conduct. You asked for my word, Lord Stark bit out through clenched teeth. Is that not enough? Ordinarily it would be so, Bolton allowed, but I can see you are annoyed by the situation. Far better to keep Rickon with us for the time being. The men behind Lord Stark became restless. Harold saw Jasper and Gendry's faces. They were red with outrage. That the Lord of the Dread Fort would hold a hostage was nothing new. Even Lord Stark had partaken in the practice, holding Theon Greyjoy as surety for his father's loyalty. But to use a child to attempt to extort terms from the Starks in this manner was an affront to every notion of honor. Even if I agreed to this, Lord Stark said haltingly, Harry would never consent to surrender Carhold to usurpers. You forget, my lord, Roose said softly, you are his liege lord. Command him. He paused for dramatic effect, however, in case that is not sufficient. Tell him that we have his sister, Aelys Karstark, as our guest at Carhold. She is to marry Arnulf's heir, Cregan. There was a sharp intake of breath from Lord Eddard's party. Bad enough they threaten a young boy, but a girl as well. Have they no honor at all? Ramsay snickered. She's a grown woman, now. I can't wait to meet her. Lord Stark ignored him, instead regarding Roose. You would threaten Harry's sister to get his compliance. It is somewhat unsavory, it's true, Bolton agreed. However, this is where we are. And what would we not do for family? Your own son Robb took an army south because you and your daughters were captives of the Lannisters. At least your other son and Harry's sister will remain in the north, amongst their homelands. Aelys will sit her father's seat once she is married to Cregan, if that gives Harry any comfort. Harold's hand dropped to his sword. He waited for a word from Lord Eddard, a call to arms that they should attack these monsters. He was to be disappointed. With a quick flick of the reins, Lord Stark urged his horse forward. I will consider your terms. You will have my answer soon enough. You have till midday, Lord Stark, Roose replied, but while you think on it, remember the words of my house, our blades are sharp. Indeed I shall, Lord Eddard answered. He slowly scanned the men before him, making no attempt to hide that he was taking their measure. And you best remember the words of House Stark, winter is coming. With that, the Warden of the North wheeled his horse and rode back towards his army. Gendry I. A short while later the party met under the canvas ceiling of Lord Stark's command tent outside the walls of Winterfell. The original party that had been at the parley were joined by Lord Redfort, Howland Reed and Mors Umber, a monstrously large man that had arrived a week ago from Last Hearth with 100 men. He stood to one side of the map table chewing roughly on a leg of beef. Arya stood with Gendry against one of the tent walls, excluded from discussion but permitted to overhear it. "What you tell us is grievous news," Horton Redfort muttered after his son had informed him of the content of the recent meeting. Lord Stark himself said nothing, he merely busied himself looking over the map of the area, scrutinizing the details of the parchment that covered the small table. To think it could come to this. "I knew the Boltons, Roost's son Domeric was my squire." He sighed heavily before adding, "If what you say is true, if Rickon Stark and Aelys Karstark are captives, we cannot move against our enemies." Jasper and Harold Hardang nodded soberly. Howland Reed, shrouded in shadow of his heavy hood and cloak, gave no sign that he had heard. The Riley Cranogman stood quietly observing his liege lord. Next to Gendry, Arya fidgeted anxiously. "The Karstark girl is not the problem," Mors rumbled, his shaggy beard hanging from his face in a great white wave. "Arnulf is a fucking coward. We take out Bolton and he'll yield like warm bread under the knife." "How do you suggest we do that, sir?" Horton relied, sniffing disdainfully at the northerner. There was no doubting the man smelled something fierce, a regrettable consequence of sleeping in the wild for over a week as he made his way to Winterfell. Gendry thought that after he had arrived Mors would have at least availed himself of the hot springs below Winterfell to wash the muck and small of the country off him. He had been surprised to find that, after a quick conversation with Lord Eddard, Mors had been dispatched straight away on an urgent task. Both Umber, and his men, had not been seen until the evening meal yesterday, trooping in from the country even more sweaty and dishevelled than when they arrived from last hearth. There was no indication of where they had been and the Umber men were not in a talkative mood. "We cannot move against the enemy when he has hostages," Horton continued. "To fight we'll have to rescue them, which will, no doubt, be tough going. Bolton will surely have any captives safely guarded." "Before we discuss that," Jasper Redfort said cautiously, "can we confirm that it is Rickard's wolf, my lord? It could just be another wolf's head." "Fuck me. You know of many wolves with a head twice the size of your own, Redfort." Mors thundered, "It's a direwolf's, plain as the beard on my face." "All right," Jasper continued doggedly, "but does that automatically follow that it belongs to one of the Stark children?" "It is a direwolf head, there is no doubt about it," Lord Stark confirmed slowly. "I haven't seen my boys in well over a year, much less their wolves, but no ordinary wolf would have a head that size. It is at least comparable to Robb's wolf," Grey whined. "I'm not sure which of my sons was its owner, but, trust me, it belongs to one of them." That ended that line of questioning. Lord Horton cleared his throat. "I am as offended by Lord Bolton's actions as any here, but we surely cannot act against him when he has Lord Eddard's son. The first sign of trouble will condemn the boy to a hideous death." Lord Horton's eyes dropped. Perhaps, we should make peace in the short term in order to get young Rickon or Bran back." "No peace. We either find a way or make one," Mors said, throwing the bone of the creature he had been eating onto the floor. The northerner was undeterred by Horton's look of disgust. "Fuckers will have your boy close by, Ned. We just need to get him out of Bolton's treacherous grip." Lord Stark nodded. "I agree, it would make sense for Roose to keep any hostage close by. It would enable him keep them secure, plus there is always a chance I might demand to see Abby captive before making such a shameful peace. If I had to guess, I would suppose that Roose has any hostage by the river," Lord Stark said, pointing at the fork of the white knife that was just east of their position. "That way they would be close by, but, at the slightest trouble from us, they can have them on a fast horse to the Dread Fort." No one said anything, though Gendry noted that Arya's fidgeting had stopped. A quick look at her face told him that she was listening intently to her father's words. "The trick," Lord Stark stated, "is to engage the enemy at such a speed that they are caught unprepared. If we strike hard and fast, we can get to the river quickly enough so that the enemy does not have time to get Rickon and any other hostages away." "Tell us your plan, my lord," Horton Redfort said, hesitantly. Lord Stark began talking, but movement to the side distracted Gendry. He turned quickly but only caught the closing of the tent flap that indicated a recent departure. He didn't need to check to see that Arya had disappeared. Confirming that he wasn't immediately needed, Gendry went after Arya. He exited the tent to see her slim figuring walking hurriedly towards her tent. Wanting to speak to her, but not draw attention, the young squire rushed after her as fast as he was able. He found her kneeling by a small chest at the back of her tent. She was removing a long object. He could tell at a glance what it was, her sword, needle. What the hell do you think you're doing? She turned to face him, her face dark in the dim light of the tent. Go away, Gendry. I have things to do. She got up and started to dress herself in her leather training armor. Gendry gawked at her. He stepped into the tent and closed the canvas flaps so that they would not be seen. I ask again, what are you doing? Arya paused, midway through donning her armor. She looked at him in exasperation. I'm going to rescue my brother, what do you think I'm doing? Gendry froze. In truth, he half suspected she would try something like this. He raised his hands imploringly. You think you'll fight your way to them on your own? Why not? Arya asked dismissively, you and Syrio are always telling me how small I am. I'll slip right through the Bolton lines and... And what? Gendry demanded, take on the Bolton army with your little pig stick and rescue your brother from your family's enemies. Arya drew her sword in a blink of an eye. Before he even knew what was happening, the blade was at his throat. Don't insult Needle. She tapped his cheek with the slim blade before withdrawing it and returning to her armor. I'm not going to sit here while my brother is a prisoner. Your father. Father's plan is to get to the river, Arya snorted. He'll never get there in enough time to stop them escaping or even killing Rickon or Bran. Our only chance is to sneak ahead of the army and beat them to it. It's too risky. Gendry argued, you don't even know which one of your brothers the enemy has. Arya finished adjusting the leather straps of her armor. She looked at him quizzically, her gaze ferocious in the dim light of the tent. Do you think it matters to me which one is a hostage? They are both my brothers. Gendry suppressed the urge to shake her. You told me that Bran is hurt, that he can't walk. Even if you got there ahead of the attack, how in seven hells are you going to carry a cripple back to our lines? Don't call him that. Arya whirled and slapped him, hard. The blow itself did little damage, but the shock cut him to the quick. He stepped in and grabbed her arms, pinning them to her sides. Arya, this is madness. It's madness to do nothing. Arya argued, blinking back tears, I can't let those monsters hurt Bran or Rickon. I just can't. Trust your father too. Father is too busy to see to Rickon or Bran. Came Arya's muffled cry as she choked back a sob. He wants to get justice for Uncle Edmure's wedding. It's what a lord should do, he can't focus on Bran or Rickon. I don't believe that, Gendry replied firmly, your father loves you. All of you. He will do his duty. Arya noted sourly, it's what he's done all his life. Fighting the Boltons is his duty, even if Rickon or Bran are threatened. He wouldn't let them be harmed. Gendry cried, exasperated. Not intentionally, Arya said sadly, he'll have a plan, I just don't think it will work. The girl started to struggle in his grip, I need to do something to help. I can't let you. The struggling intensified, let me go. No. Arya abruptly stopped, she looked up at him, her eyes bright against the dark thin strands of her hair. The servants at Runestone and Iron Oaks said you were fond of me. Is that true? In an instant his throat dried up. He found it hard to speak. Gods. Well, that is to say. She smiled slightly. Is it true? Yes, his voice was nothing but a whisper. Me too, Arya said, smiling. But if you know me, if you feel anything for me at all, then you know that I won't be stopped from doing this. I have to go. There was a long pause while he searched her eyes. Finally he gave up. Lord Stark will dismiss me, if I'm fortunate. If I'm unfortunate, he'll probably have me hung. Fine, but I'm coming with you. Arya shook her head. No, it's too dangerous. Gendry laughed. No more dangerous for me than to be here when your father finds out what you've done and how I did nothing to stop it. Rue sighed. The torchlight flicked across the tent, casting shadows on the wall. Though it was nearly mid-morning, it was still fairly dark outside. Winter is coming. As the Starks are so fond of saying. Roose looked up across his own map table, keeping his growing anger in check as he surveyed his commanders. On the left-hand side of the table were Arnold Karstark and his second son Arthur. Across from him was Lud Whitehill and his third-born son Torren. At the opposing end of the table stood Roost's bastard, Ramsay. It was Ramsay who was speaking when Roos returned his attention to the gathering. We should attack now, while they are unprepared. We can have the advantage of numbers. We can sweep the scum from the field. Roos surprised a sigh of irritation. No sense of decorum or patience. I blame his mother. We have the advantage of numbers here, Arnulf said, spittle flying from his lips in a shower across the table. But we are grossly outnumbered when you account for the rest of the force across the north. Not to mention Robb Stark's army in the south. What of them? Ramsay said hotly, an odd glint in his eye. Roos had seen the expression before, it usually heralded immense violence. Are they here? No. Stark has done us the service of dividing his host and sending a great deal of it westward to deal with the Dustins. We can lop off the snake's head now. Kill Eddard Stark and deal with the rest of the army later. So short-sighted. Better men than you have tried to kill Eddard Stark, he's still here. Lord Whitehill stirred, his hands gripped the broad girth of his stomach. What would we do if we were successful in killing Stark? Someone else would just take control of the rest of the force and march it here. Maybe Harry on Karstark would take control, or, worse, that fucker Gregor Forrester. We can't beat them all. He looks more like an alehouse master rather than a highborn lord. Fucking coward. Ramsay snarled, we have the advantage, we should use it. They dare not attack us while we have Ned Stark's precious son. You would say that. But we do not yet have my great niece Aelys, Arnold reminded them mournfully. My son, Cregan, has not yet returned from Castle Black. That is unfortunate. Roose spoke for the first time, but Rickon Stark will be sufficient for the time being. Sufficient enough to secure House Bolton and the Dread Fort at any rate. We can still. Enough. Roose commanded with a stern look and the raise of one hand. He looked around the table. My lords, you all know the disposition of your forces. I suggest you attend to them. It is 2 hours until midday. At that time, we shall make a determination of our next step. Obeying his order, the commanders trooped out of the tent. They passed Ramsay as they moved, but Roost's son made no effort to follow them. In but a moment father and son were alone. Roose looked idly up from the map to his son. Bold of you to attempt to sway me in front of others. I am your son. Ramsay's tone was sullen, angry. I have a right to be heard. Quite so. Roose sat back into a waiting chair. Your mistake is in thinking that I will listen to your petty mewlings. His son blinked stupidly and then his face reddened with rage. I am not some dog you can mistreat at will. Indeed not. Roose muttered quietly. A dog at least is afforded a modicum of common sense. Ramsay slammed both fists into the map table. The wood rocked from the impact and, for a brief moment, Roose thought it might collapse. Somehow though the piece of furniture stayed upright and intact. You cannot speak to me this way. His son spat while glowering at him. I may speak to you however I wish, Roose declared with a wave of his hand. Everything you have, I gave to you. You best remember that, bastard. His son shook with rage, his teeth clenched in white-hot anger. It's almost amusing. Ah well, the fun must come to an end. But Roose said calmingly, now that we are alone, you may as well have your say. The youth gave him an odd look. I believe his tone was measured, that we can be victorious in the field. That we can beat Lord Stark's force and send them fleeing back to Winterfell. What of the rest of the host? The ones led by Harry on Karstark and Gregor Forrester. Roose's son shook his head. If we can march to fight them one at a time we'll be able to beat them as well. He's so eager for battle. Simpleton knows nothing of the world. All the fighting he's ever done is to attack unsuspecting victims or kill those already beaten and helpless against him. If he thinks Ned Stark and his allies will be so easy to overcome, then he's got another thing coming. The other hosts each outnumber our own. Roose said quietly. Ramsay snorted. After we've captured or killed Ned Stark the fight will go out of them. The Vale forces are only here out of loyalty to their precious Ned. Eliminate him and the Knights of the Vale will ride south. And then? Roose asked curiously. When the forces in the north have been crushed. Then? Ramsay's burrowed frowned. Why, then we march south and secure Moat Cailin against Robb Stark. He smiled evilly. The next time an army marches up the neck they'll face more than 100 Ironborn, I promise you. Roose paused as if considering, that is quite the plan. But you forget, to pacify the north will require a great number of men. Even with all our allies we number barely 5,000. That is not enough to hold the region against our foes. What foes? Ramsay blurted out, excitement overriding his caution. If we hammer the Stark army there'll be no one left to fight against us. You forget, Roose tapped the map, that the return of Ned Stark has stirred up a great amount of hatred towards our house. Now that our lies about what occurred at the Twins have been exposed, even the small folk will be tough to control. Then we merely clamp down harder. Use fear of the consequences to scare the people into compliance. Ramsay cried, we have the numbers. We might have the numbers now, Roose reasoned, how many will we have after we've fought the battle needed to win the war? And then he spoke over Ramsay, who had opened his mouth to reply, how many will we need to hold Moat Cailin and deal with the incursions from the other side of the wall? The wall. Did you forget? Roose chided his son, we have received a letter from the Maester of Castle Black. A Wilderling army was sighted not so long ago approaching the wall. The Night's Watch called for aid. Since then, nothing. Now I care nothing for the watch and its obsolete purpose, but, if wildlings are through the wall then we shall have to deal with them. Ramsay rubbed his head as if it suddenly hurt. We can deal with all of that later. So we shall, Roose said calmly, but first I mean to bind Ned Stark to us by making him swear a vow that will award our land's independence. Once secured we'll work out a way of dealing with our foes. It will be a much slower process than all-out war, but we will eventually triumph. It could take years. Ramsay exclaimed in something akin to a pout. Even so, it is the best option. Ned Stark is an honorable man. We will make chains of his word and use it to hinder his options. Ramsay considered for a second. He smiled cruelly, the northern houses are too honorable for their own good. They seem to have a perverse attachment to their families. You showed precious little of that when you murdered Domeric, you disgusting little worm. If I wasn't sure you were my son I'd have you flayed like the misbegotten ingrate you are. And we will use that perversion to our advantage. Ramsay was clearly not placated, at the very least we should. A horn blast reverberated through the Bolton camp. Roose jumped to his feet and headed for the entrance, Ramsay hot on his heels. Everywhere was confusion, men ran about here and there, trying to get into position. Roose called up to a makeshift watchtower, what news? A guard, sporting the livery of House Bolton, leaned over the tower railing. The enemy advances, my lord. The entire host is crossing the field. To arms. Roose ordered, whirling to bark at a passing messenger. All commanders to their troops. He turned back towards his tent. He had his sword to retrieve. As he passed his son he could not help but see Ramsay's wide grin. Roose fought the urge to strike his son about the face. What are you waiting for? Get to your soldiers in the North Wood. He watched his son run off in search of his horse. He looked over the tent line to where he knew the enemy was coming. Well, it seems as if Ned Stark does not negotiate with those he perceives to be traitors. Not at all surprised, Roose Bolton ducked through the tent opening to find his weapon. Harold too. His unit was on the far wings of the army. The one furthest to the north in an army that ran in a loose circle from the north through the west and to the south like a crescent moon. Ahead of them were two large wooded areas. In between the woods, set down near the river, was the Bolton camp. Even now a small force had managed to assemble in a rough column to the west side of the camp, facing the incoming threat. Harold reached inside his gauntlets with his opposing hand and extracted a small piece of material, a merest slither of silk lace. Sangza. Raising it to his lips, Harold gave the material a quick kiss before returning it to the safety of his gauntlet. It had taken a great deal of time to work up the courage for her favor, but she had granted it with a broad smile and a kiss on his cheek. The memory was still like sunshine on his heart. He turned to his squire, who quickly moved forward to provide him with his helm. As his squire worked on securing the helm, further horns went up along the Stark line and the central column, that of the Stark infantry, went up. As on giant mass, the ranks of soldiers advanced down the center of the field. At their head was Lord Stark, mounted and fierce-looking, clad in his grey armor and armored. So it begins. Harold, now with helm well and truly in place, quickly mounted his horse. He turned his head to yell at the ranks of mounted knights behind him. "Anytime now, lads. Just hold position." To the south a horn could be heard, cutting across the clamor of the moving infantry. Harold craned his neck to see over the rise and down at the far end of the army. There, in the group led by Jasper Redfort, he saw the cavalry wheel their mounts and head away to the westernmost river of the White Knife, the one that ran close to Castle Sewin. Roose Bolton saw it too. As he sat upon his charger at the head of his own infantry, he watched in mounting disbelief at the southern flank of Vale Knights turned tail and ran. What in the name of? Roose pondered. Have they seen Torrhen's host? Another horn went up, this time from the Stark enemy force that continued its movement towards Roose's own column. The troops picked up speed as they moved into a brisk march. He's trying to push us into the river before we have a chance to respond. Especially given that he seems to have lost one of his flanks own. That being said, his central force is a large one. It would most likely brush my own aside if I were to give it an opportunity. Which, of course, I haven't the slightest inclination to do. He was tempted to smile. But only tempted. Turning to one of the messengers, Roose spoke quickly. A message to all principal commanders. The enemy is approaching. All units are to hold position until directed by me. He paused as he looked at the army bearing down on him. Unless, have all units watch their sides in case the enemy try a flank attack. As Roose's messengers dispersed, a rider arrived from one of the Whitehill columns. Compliments of Lord Whitehill, my lord. He wishes to know if we are to advance on the enemy. After this, Lord Whitehill is going to need a lesson or two in listening. No, he will remain where he is until ordered otherwise. Roose turned his stern visage on the hapless messenger. Is that understood? The man paled. Why, yes my lord. Then go. Roose barked dismissively. He did not bother to watch the unlucky man ride away. Ned. He kept pace with his men, determined not to get too far ahead but conscious that he needed to be in the front rank of his men. His force was now exposed in the wide expanse of an open field. To both sides of his men were heavily wooded areas that led them, like a tunnel, towards Roose Bolton's host. He had forgotten what it was like to actually start an open field battle. Harrenhal had already been ongoing when he arrived, and the fight at Moat Cailin had been a kind of rushed siege. This was different. It had been Ned himself that started this fight. And the responsibility will be mine if I have it wrong. He glanced a little behind him, to the left and the right. The front ranks of men were looking determined, anxious, bloodthirsty. A whole spectrum of emotions, with as many different attitudes as there were faces. Almost time. Ned raised his arm, counting out the beats in his head. Ready shields. Behind him he heard the massed ranks of troops hoist their shield into position as they moved, protecting their heads and sides. Roose 3. He knows. Shaking off an unfamiliar chill that went, unbidden, down his spine, Roose turned in his saddle to shout at the buglers. Commence firing. Before he could even turn back, the loud notes of numerous horns sounded. At once, 100 shards of murderous wood with metal's points filled the air. Roose watched dispassionately as the Stark's force was pummeled from Roose's own host. Some men went down but more kept marching. Now the sides. Again another horn note sounded and more arrows flew from the Whitehill force to Roose's southern flank. The arrows streaked through the air with the speed of bird flight. They arced high and then impacted heavily the massed ranks of vulnerable troops. Had Stark not ordered his troops to move their shields into position ahead of the first volley, the Bolton attack might have claimed a lot more lives. As it was, though many men dropped, the central force kept determinedly marching towards Roose's own lines. All eastern units to fire at will. The air became thick with arrows. The missiles kept coming in wave after wave, dealing out injury and death. Most were stopped by wide shields and bucklers, but some found the gaps in the column's defenses and found bodies to impact beneath. Roose imagined the confusion, chaos, pain and fear of the approaching men. They expected a fierce charge, and a quick fight. Instead they were caught in the open as they were buffeted by endless winds that carried arrows and death. More and more men began to fall, as slowly but surely the host began to shrink, withering under the deadly onslaught. Yet, ever so slowly, the men carried on marching. The Stark host moved inexorably forward, now completely in the tunnel between the two separate woods. Watching with a sense of satisfaction, Roose allowed an unfamiliar feeling of joy spark in his chest. Maybe Ramsay was right after all. Gendry too. It was dark in the northern woods. The trees were tall and made of dark branches that reached high into the air and choked what little sunlight there was. "We shouldn't be here," he muttered, not for the first time. His companion cursed. She was dressed as a boy with her hair tied back and dirt on her face. "Seven hells. If I'd known you'd be like this I wouldn't have let you come. We're lost, Arya. We'll never get anywhere near where you want to go." "Yes we will," the girl said, determination gripping her. "We entered the woods on the western side. If Father's map is right this will run almost the water's edge of the White Knife as it flows down from Long Lake. We just have to head in an easterly direction and we'll hit the river." She smiled at her own cleverness. "We'll be completely hidden from the enemy by the woods." "Wonderful," Gendry grunted as he pushed a bramble bush aside. "Just one question." "Yes." "Which way is east?" Arya groaned in frustration as she pushed ahead through the foliage. Shaking his head in exasperation, Gendry made himself follow her. They found a small path little more than an opening in the trees and they followed it gingerly. In the distance horns were sounding, indicating that the battle had begun. "And we have no idea where the river is. We're running out of time." They slowly made their way through the wood, avoiding fallen trees and other difficult obstacles. It was hard going. In some places the foliage was so thick that Gendry had to take his large knife from his belt and hack at the branches and dense hedges. A sudden shout ahead of them made them freeze. Both youths stood quite still before they flattened themselves against a large tree. "What was that?" Arya's voice was but a whisper. "I don't know," Gendry muttered, as quietly as he could. "I didn't see." They waited another few minutes. They strained to hear but nothing further could be detected. Way off to the south the sounds of battle could faintly be heard. "We can't wait here," Arya said quietly before inching round the tree and sliding off into the thickets. "Seven hells. This is utter madness." Gritting his teeth, Gendry pushed away from the tree and followed Arya. After a little way the light increased and they realized they had got closer to the tree line. "But on which side of the woods are we on?" The sounds of fighting were increasing with every step they took. Creeping forward they inched closer and closer to the line of trees that marked where the woods met the fields. They kept near to the ground, eager to avoid being seen by any enemy. They reached the tree line and Gendry's heart sank. Ahead of them was the massed host led by Eddard Stark. It was marching past them heading across the grassy plain to Roose Bolton's waiting force. On the other side of them, directly through the column of Northerners was the other wood. Gendry could even see the dim outline of Ned Stark, mounted on his charger at the head of his force, urging them on towards the enemy. "Fuck. We're on the south side of the woods. Instead of going towards the river we must have got turned around and headed south instead. We've walked all that way for no bloody benefit." Beside him, Arya seemed to reach the same conclusion. Momentarily her shoulders sagged and she seemed to struggle with her emotions. Then she drew up and said defiantly, "Come on. Wait." He pulled her close as a group of arrows flew from the trees to their left, from under the cover afforded by the wood. The missiles flew and smashed a hole in the ranks of Lord Stark's host. Men were thrown from their feet, some screamed as arrows punched through armor and flesh. At a glance Gendry could see the same thing happening to the south. Arrows were flying from the trees to cut down Lord Stark's men. "Gods! They have archers concealed in the woods on both sides of your father. You think?" Arya had tears in her eyes. Ahead of them Lord Stark was wheeling his horse, shouting encouragement to his men. Though there were arrows in his shield and even one lodged into the armor coating his arm, he had kept his place on his horse. "We have to do something." "What can we do?" Gendry had never felt so helpless. Ahead of him the man who he owed so much to was struggling to keep his men in order. Already stragglers in the back ranks had broken formation and had started to run, fleeing back towards Winterfell. Lord Stark shouted back and forth trying to maintain order. Then another volley hit and the Stark host collapsed. The ranks suddenly seemed to fold in on themselves and the men turned and ran at full speed back towards safety. eager to escape the death trap their leader had walked them into. Gendry grabbed at Arya. "We have to get back," he hissed, "the army's about to be overrun. We'll never get to your brother now." Arya knocked his hand away furiously. "I won't give up. I can't." With that she turned away and plowed back into the dark confines of the woods. Fighting the urge to roar with frustration, Gendry followed. Ruse 4. It was all going to plan. Stark's host was broken, fleeing for their lives back towards the ruin that had once been Winterfell. On the field where the army had once stood were the casualties of Lord Stark's ill-advised march. It looked as if hundreds of bodies had been left either dead or dying on the field. And not a single casualty on our side. Not bad for a day's work. He felt the compulsion to order his army forward. To strike home and finish his foes. Who knew? He might even be able to capture a fleeing Lord Eddard as he ran home with his tail between his legs. However, he stayed his hand. It would be unlikely that they'd capture the man, and why waste good troops for a symbolic victory? No, far better to order an orderly withdrawal across the river and head for home. He still held Rickon Stark and could still force terms on his enemies. Plus, today's events would just damage the man's reputation. The great Ned Stark, so incapable of command, he led an army of his best men into a trap where they got picked apart. Glorious. Roose beckoned towards a messenger. Torrhen Whitehall and Arthur Karstark would have to be withdrawn from the southern wood first before Roose issued similar order to Ramsay in the northern glade. "We will fall back in good order across the river, and there will be nothing Ned Stark can do about it beyond counting his dead." Just as he opened his mouth to speak, a cacophony of horns sounds. He turned in his saddle to watch, astonished as the Bolton force in the northward appeared at the tree line. They paused to get in formation, and then they charged after the fleeing host. "Ramsay! You impatient fool!" As Roose's bastard spurred down the ride and drove his cavalry towards Ned Stark's men, another horn went up. In the southern wood, the two separate units led by Torrhen Whitehill and Arthur Karstark charged from their hiding places and made for the enemy. From both woods ran men at arms and archers as they moved to support the cavalry as it charged. Ramsay had clearly planned for this eventuality in advance. I could almost admire his ambition if it wasn't so foolhardy and disobedient. He paused, frowning. Whatever he did now, the vast portion or his army, almost 2,500 troops, were now committed to the fight. Roose knew he could either let Ramsay dictate the battle and thus get all the credit, or he could order his own host forward to add to the fray. Roose shrugged. Credit meant nothing to him. Only victory. Let Ramsay have his day in the sun. He glanced skywards. Such as it is. The Bolton, Karstark and Whitehill forces got closer and closer, covering the ground between them and the enemy with speed. He felt a tingle of anticipation. It is just a matter of time. Maybe I was wrong. Suddenly a horn was sounded from within the Stark lines. Abruptly the men's flight ceased as quickly as it had begun. The running men stopped mid-stride and joined ranks once more. The whole rout was over in an instant. Within but moments the entire column reformed. Roose's eyes widened. How was that possible? The enemy were routing, they had the enemy bearing down on them. How could they find it in them to reform so quickly? Unless, that was what they intended to do all along. Cursing, Roose looked at the battlefield objectively. Even with the reformed column, it was too strung out to afford much protection to Ramsay's cavalry. The lines was much too thin to take a cavalry charge from both sides at once. "You may have thought yourself clever, Ned, but you're still going to lose." As if in answer to Roose's thought, he suddenly caught sight of Lord Stark himself. The Warden of the North was still at the head of his force, bellowing at his men. Roose watched, astonished as the men cheered the man as he suddenly waved his sword. Another horn sounded, and then the column split into two distinct sections, several ranks deep, facing back to back against the incoming cavalry. It was then that Roose understood. Ned too. He sat in his saddle and watched the two distinct forces approach his own. Smiling grimly, he turned his mount to survey his host. Where once had been a column facing in one direction was now two forces of warriors facing opposing directions, but, by virtue of the massed ranks, still supported one another. Back to back the force faced the enemy. Archers in the center. Hit anything that comes within range. A cry of acknowledgement went up from the center as the archers got into position. "Aim high," Ned ordered. "Trust me, you'll hit something." There was a ripple of laughter. Ned smiled as he watched the enemy get closer. Any second now. "Lock shields." There was a metallic thud as hundreds of shields were slammed together to afford the best proper protection for the men wielding them. "Ready spears." Heavy wooden spears deployed along the lines, forming a barrier of death against the horses and the men riding them. Ned readied his sword. He knew it was about time he joined his men. One last thing though. He reared his horse, pulling on the reins to make it neigh loudly. Men turned their heads to look at him. "Who owns the North?" Ned asked loudly. "We do," came the shouted reply. "Not good enough." "Who owns the North?" he bellowed. "We do," the host roared. Ned felt his heart might burst. This was why he had chosen Northmen to join him in the center. While they would be pummeled and hammered by the enemy, it was his people, Ned knew, who could be relied upon to hold when needed and to match the foe steel for steel. "Then show me." Ned urged his horse forward through a gap in the shield wall and into the center of the morass. He was the only one mounted in his entire host, so he stood out, a large target for the enemy to take aim at. "Now, all we can do is wait." Gendry 3. They skirted the inside of the tree line, eager to get past the battle but reluctant to lose sight of the fight itself. Gendry's mouth had dropped open as the army reformed. He had no idea that the Northmen were capable of that kind of disciple. "I shouldn't be surprised, the men down there would do anything for Lord Stark." Arya's father was in the middle of the column, shouting out to his men to hold the line as the enemy got closer. Gendry wanted to return to their mission, but he couldn't resist watching as the Bolton cavalry hit the shield wall with the force of a hammer on an anvil. For a heartbeat he was certain that the wall would break, that the men would buckle under the force of the charge. He was wrong. Just like an anvil, the wall held its place. Bending but not breaking. Then the force on the southern side hit. Again the column line wavered, but then it steadied itself. Gendry watched for a moment as the northern line held the enemy in place, stabbing outwards with their spears and swords. Horses fell, dropping their riders unceremoniously to the floor. He saw the downed steeds thrashing about, impeding the progress of their allies behind. It went on like this for a few moments. Bolton men tried to cut their way through, seeking any gap or weakness in the wall, but the Northmen held firm, plugging gaps with their bodies and shields, spears jabbing upwards into the no longer mobile horses. More and more of the Bolton force dropped. Lord Stark was everywhere. He controlled his horse with his legs as he held his mighty shield with one arm while brandishing his sword as he laid into the opposing army. Again and again he hacked at the enemy, making anyone who came close pay a grievous price for the act. The Northerners around him seemed to draw strength from their lord, and they fought back against the Boltons with savage ferocity. However, weight of numbers began to tell and the column wavered once more. A horn sounded from within the northern ranks. The sound carried even through the deafening noise of the battle. Gendry looked around. "What is the signal for?" "Nothing has changed." Movement above him caught his eye. The branches about him were rustling, but this was not something caused by the wind. As he watched, the very trees seemed to shake. Gendry's mind recalled something. He had experienced this before, at Harrenhal. "Arya, get down." He grabbed Lord Stark's youngest daughter and threw her to the floor, covering her with his own body. Cavalry thundered past him. His caution was unnecessary. The horsemen were some way away, though the sheer number of them had caused the shaking that he had found so disconcerting. To his right a vast column of cavalry, hundreds strong, thundered past their position, the far end of the column still some distance away, and sped down the rise after the Bolton host. As soon as the new arrivals were clear, Gendry stood and gaped as the knights chased down the slope towards the embattled column of Northerners. He craned his neck to see that the exact same thing had happened in the southern wood. Fully armored knights on mighty chargers were galloping at full tilt towards the Bolton line. By the gods, they'll be hit on both sides. They thought they had surrounded Lord Stark, but instead they've been trapped in a vice themselves. Arya pulled on his sleeve. "We have to move." Gendry looked down at her. "What? Why?" The girl looked angrily at him. "Why the hell are we here?" To rescue my brother and Alis Karstark if she's with him. We will never get a better chance. Come on. With that she ran off into the woods. Gendry cast one last glance at the battle before he followed her, running full speed. Roose v. His rage grew within him, almost as heated as the battle raging on the plain below him. I will flay Ramsay for this. If he survives. The Lord of the Dread Fort could do nothing but observe as his cavalry wings, along with their supporting infantry, were smashed from the rear by the Knights of the Vale. The Bolton force, having been unable to destroy the Stark column, were suddenly hammered on both sides and squeezed between the Vale cavalry behind them and the Northern infantry in front of them. Curses! Lord Stark had held the centre just long enough to draw the Bolton forces in. He had somehow divined that Roose would have put flanking forces in the woods to the north and south and had deliberately walked his own force in between the two forces. He had allowed his own men to take the brunt of an attack before feigning a retreat to tempt the glory-seeking youngsters in Roose's camp to come after him. Once they'd committed themselves, he had checked their advance and brought reserves into play behind them. I could commend it, if it wasn't so devastating to my own efforts. A horrible choice now confronted Roose Bolton. He could either withdraw and leave his cavalry to their destruction, or he could commit his central forces to offer aid his stricken allies. How much longer will my men follow me if I do nothing to relieve my own imperiled warriors? Gritting his teeth in anger, he gestured again to a nearby messenger. Order Lord Whitehill to lead his force down towards the enemy. He is to march immediately to relieve his own son. As the messenger cantered away, Roose turned his head in the opposing direction. Walton. The captain, known to his man as Steel Shanks owing to the steel greaves he wore on his legs, rode up to his lord. The burly warrior nodded. My lord. Take command of half the force here and march towards Ramsay. Double time. You are to drive all before you. Yes, my lord. The captain rode off to obey his lord's wishes. Roose turned towards the battle and examined the battlefield. If Ludd and Walton can attack the two flanks, I can hit the center where the column is weakest. Stark has placed his men too much to the sides to repulse the cavalry. The center will fall if pushed. He gathered himself, taking a deep breath. Sound the advance. Ned 3. He hacked down, taking the enemy's arm off at the elbow. As the man fell back, his cry of pain and shock lost in the tumult, Ned turned to take the jab of a spear against his shield. He ducked low and rammed the edge of his shield into the face of this new attacker. The shield impacted the man's face dead center, breaking his nose with a satisfying crunch. Ned swung his sword up and down to cleave off half the attack's head. The man fell soundlessly to the mud. The ground was slippery and uneven, churned up by the mass of men fighting on it, slick and slippery from the blood and gore now spread across it, like stew on bread. His horse fought for purchase as Ned spun again and slashed at yet another attacked who wanted to make a name for himself by bringing down the Warden of the North. His sword cut through the end of the spear and left the man with nothing but a pointed piece of wood for a weapon. Ned moved to finish him, but then suddenly more men were in his place, the initial attacker swallowed by the crowd. He pulled back and surveyed the battle. The northern column was ragged and frayed but looked to be holding. More or less. The Vale Knights had struck home and the attack against his own men had been significantly weakened. In the distance he saw Horton Redfort's infantry marching quickly to support him. Our reserves are committed. Now is the time. Sound the advance. He screamed at the hornblower, his voice sounds rasped and dry in his throat. Forward. Thankfully the boy heard and he blew vigorously into the horn he kept strapped to his side. All along the column a cry of anger and defiance went up. A guttural bellow of primal rage. As one the column split fully in two and advanced on the enemy to the south and north. Pushing straight into the enemy and cutting them down. The Northmen were frenzied, beyond control, as they hacked and slashed into the Bolton ranks. I have no need to control them now. Only release them on our enemy. The Boltons were stunned. At least they expected the Northmen to remain pinned. At no point did they expect the defenders to suddenly strike back against them. Before they had a chance to react, the Northmen were among them, striking home with sword and spear. Ned glanced in both directions. By his reckoning the southern enemy host had the advantage of numbers. They need me there. Decision made, he spurred his horse to the south, ducking low as he plowed into the enemy ranks, his sword spinning as he slashed and stabbed. The enemy fell back beneath the onslaught, boots sliding in the thick mud. Only there was nowhere for them to go. The Knights of the Vale were amongst them now, striking Carstark and Whitehill men down, almost with impunity. Ned's horse suddenly took an arrow through the neck. The beast reared in distress and he lost his grip. He tumbled to the ground, the impact forcing the air from his lungs. He lay there for a moment breathing deeply before lurching to his feet. His shield had been lost somewhere in the dirt. He leveled his sword as a man ran at him. He ducked under the savage cut and drove his weapon through his attacker's leather armor. The weapon burst through the man's back and Ned twisted the blade so that he could pull his weapon free. With a spray of blood the man fell back, but then two more took his place. Brow furrowed he waded into the two newcomers, blade searching for gaps in their armor. One of the men panicked and tried to run, only for a Vale Knight to skewer him with his lance. The other man tried to slash at Ned but he sidestepped and slashed his gauntlet into the man's face. He felt the cheekbones give and he slashed low with his sword. His weapon went under the man's paltry defense and cut deeply into the thigh of his enemy. The man screamed as the muscle was severed and he toppled to his back. Ned stabbed downwards and the man screamed no more. Stark. Instinct made Ned weave out of the way as a horse barreled past. A man, clad in the armament of House Carstark, swung around and made to charge at him once again. Arnulf. No, this one is too young. Maybe one of his sons. That was all the time he had to think as he was forced to dive to the floor as the rider charged once again. Even though he moved as fast as he could, he was still close enough to hear the enemy sword sing as it passed near his head. He landed on both knees, pain flashed through him, he grunted and then threw himself upright. As predicated, the horse was bearing down hard. Ned sidestepped and slashed savagely at the legs of the beast. His sword hacked through one then two legs in a shower of blood. The beast made it a short distance past him before it toppled sideways, crushing its rider as it smashed to the floor. He circled around the downed creature that was braying in agonized pain and fear. The Carstark man was laying where he had fallen, his mount having destroyed its rider's legs upon impact. The man raised his arms as he saw Ned approaching. No. Please. He gurgled pathetically, no my lord. Ned's thrust impaled the man's heart, puncturing the armor and sundering the flesh beneath. With a wrench he pulled the blade free and looked around for other foes to fight. Ruse 6. The infantry plodded methodically across the field, the sergeants urging them on with curses and promises of punishment as they thudded towards their objective. Faster, faster. Roose was 5 ranks back and he was unhappy with their progress. The infantry was the cavalry's last hope. If they didn't arrive to assist their ally soon, then the entire force would be destroyed. He signaled his horn blower. More speed. Not bothering to watch as the man looked askance at his lord, the horn blower brought his instrument to his lips and let forward a shrill note. The infantry picked up pace. Off to the south, Roose observed Lud driving his small host forward, where, to the north, Walton was yelling at his own men to advance more quickly. All of the infantry broke into a wild run. The air was filled with angry shouts. The call to war. They had covered more than half the distance to the battle when suddenly the first rank of soldiers simply disappeared. There was no better description than that. One moment the line was running full pelt at the enemy, the next, they'd gone. Then the second rank disappeared. Roose pulled on his reins, commanding his horse to stop. He felt the impact of one of his men strike the rear end of his horse, caught short by the sudden cessation of movement. He ignored the man's muffled cry of pain and looked at the field ahead. The foremost ranks of his infantry had pulled up, clearly deterred by something in the ground in front of them. However, the ranks behind had not realized this and they continued to pile in behind the men. Almost as soon as they stopped, the third and fourth rank disappeared, evidently going the same way as their fellows. However, while they disappeared, they did it a lot slower than the first few ranks, lot slower than their predecessors. They looked as if they had fallen, arms flailed as shouts of surprise and fear were heard. How can they have fallen? We're on flat land. Halt. Roose ordered. Horns sounded up and down the lines of men. Roose slowly inched his horse forward. Men moved aside as he got closer to the front. What he found caused him surprise and outrage. A vast pit trap had been dug about 2 meters across and untold meters in length. Due to the sloping gradient, the unsuspecting men hadn't seen it and they had fallen in. Roos leaned over and spied several men lying in odd angles, their neck broken. Others, who had survived, were trying to climb out, with their fellow soldiers reaching down to help them. As they were helped over the side, Roos could see that the men had blooded wounds across their bodies. Someone had filled the pit with small spikes to injure my men. His fist tightened around the reins of his horse, the stiff leather creaking as squeezed so hard it was though his hands were around his enemies' throats. The Umbers. Only they could dig so fast and make their traps so deadly. The Stark forces had determined where he would deploy and what his commanders would do when provoked. He had been totally outmaneuvered. He grit his teeth. Ahead of him the force led by Ramsay and Karstark were now overwhelmed. Reinforcements had joined the rear of Stark's column and the Bolton cavalry was starting to flee. Even if I could get my men past this obstruction, it would take time and they would refuse to build up any speed in case there were other traps and they went the same way as their friends. He saw his other infantry hosts to the north and south were encountering similar difficulties. Our entire momentum has been stopped. He saw Walton yelling at his men to find the limits of the trap while Ludwig Hall was just staring ahead in dumb shock. Useless fool. He bit back a curse as he watched his force ahead of him disintegrate against the Stark army. It is over. Harold III. His sword struck the enemy shield hard, depriving the enemy's return swing of any force as it impacted lightly against his own wooden shield. He weaved in his saddle and brought his weapon down in the space between the shield and the horse. The blade cut the steed a bloody gash and the beast went wild, bucking and twisting as it carried the man away. Smiling, Harold looked around him. The enemy was in full retreat. His assault on the Bolton force in the north was a total success. He was proud of his men's conduct. Now to chase them all the way back to the river. An arrow pinged off his helm and knocked him off balance. He fell from his horse, though he twisted to let his body better absorb the impact. For all his efforts he was still winded and he had to fight to make his vision clear. His helm had been dented by the fall and he wrenched the metal casing off his head and let it fall to the floor. Slowly the world came back into focus. Fuck. I was aiming for your throat. Harold turned just in time to see the enemy loose his next arrow right at him. He threw himself to the ground as the missile flew overhead. Not wasting time, Harold rolled to his feet and charged at the man, sword held aloft. The man threw his bow aside and drew his short sword and dagger. As Harold closed, the man spun and thrust at Harold's unprotected face. Harold caught the sword blow on his own sword but then had to skip backwards as the dagger came close to sinking into his chest. He stepped forward and slashed at the man's head but his foe parried and slashed again with his knife. He was too slow this time and the dagger bit into his armor, not breaking through but denting the side. The two men grappled. As they strained against one another, Harold saw the other man's eyes and realized that he was face to face with Ramsay, Roost's bastard. Snarling angrily, Harold summoned a reserve and threw the man back as savagely as he could. He brought his sword to bear as the evil-looking youth closed and slashed viscously at his head. Harold parried easily. The man has no discernible training or skill. He just hacks and slashes as if he was cutting meat rather than fighting a duel. Almost as he had the thought, then Ramsay was inside his guard, stabbing at Gendry's face and chest. Calming himself, Harold blocked all the blows easily. He doesn't even use both his weapons in concert. Ramsay withdrew, chuckling loudly. I don't know about you, but I'm having a lovely day. The man had an evil glint in his eye. Harold shook his head. You've lost the battle. Perhaps. Ramsay allowed, but I still have the Stark boy. With that he ducked and rolled past Harold, striking out hard as he rolled. Harold parried the sword but was a split second too slow to stop the knife that sank into Harold's leg through the gap in his plate armor. Ramsay rose and stepped in close, headbutting Harold. The Knight of the Vale saw stars as he fell backwards and hit the ground, his sword spun away from him. He heard, but couldn't see Ramsay chuckling. Ordinarily, I'd take my time and flay you properly. Here though I think I'll just take your eyes. Harold kicked out from the ground to try and ward off the attack but he hit nothing but air. He desperately shook his head to clear it but it stubbornly remained foggy. He readied himself to try and grapple with Ramsay, knowing that the bastard would have to get close to him if he were to make good on his promise to take his eyes. Sir Harold. A loud voice cried and several men were heard rushing to his aid. Harold heard a muttered curse. "You're lucky. Next time will be a different matter." Then he was gone. Ruse 7. To the north he could see his bastard son rejoin a party of his men, mount his horse and ride away from the battle. So he is craven as well as idiotic. Anger welled inside him, but he pushed it back. This was not a time for anger. Only clear, concise logic would see him through to today's end. He turned in his saddle. "Sound the withdraw." He turned to one of his captains. "Make sure the men maintain order and fall back in a proper fashion. This is not a rout." The man nodded in obedience as he rapped out orders. Roos spared one last look towards the field before wheeling his mount and urging it towards the east. Towards the river and safety. "My lord." He didn't need to look at the newcomer. "What do you want, lad?" The Lord of High Point seemed to bristle at Roost's bored tone. He drew alongside his liege lord. "My son, Torren, he's still out there. As is most of my army." "Indeed they are," Roos said dryly. "I suggest that if you want them, you go get them." My lord." Roost's temper flared. "Look around you, lad, the battle is lost. Both our sons have led their armies into calamity and been utterly destroyed. I do not propose to follow them. But my son is dead or captured," Roos said dismissively. "Either way he is of no more use to us." The man looked at him puzzled, then anger made his face go red. "Now listen here, Lord Bolton." Roost's knife slipped smoothly between a gap in the armor of Lord Whitehill, just where the armored plate crossed his chest and joined the separated piece covering his left arm. He struck under the limb, the blade slipping through the armpit, and into the man's heart. The man made no sound, though his eyes bulged horribly as he twisted the knife. Deftly, Roos withdrew the blade and slipped it back into its sheath that was attached to his horse's saddle. He rode away with his men keeping pace behind him. As he spurred his horse he heard the impact of the lifeless Lord Whitehill topple from his saddle and strike the floor. He did not turn around. Lud was always a fool. As bullish and proud as he was stupid. He saw Walton riding towards him. The man saluted in greeting, though he looked past him to where Whitehill men were surrounding their downed lord. "My lord." Lord Whitehill has been quite overcome by the events of the day. His men will tend to him. Have our own forces pull back to the river. We will cross immediately and make for the Dread Fort. Walton looked confused. "What about the rest of the men?" "Those who still live will have to come after us. I will not wait for them." "Understood." Walton's face tightened. He nodded stoically. "As my lord command." "Yes, precisely that. As I command." Gendry 4. The river rushed past them, gently wetting their feet as they got too close to the swirling water. It was at least 100 meters across at its narrowest point. His eyes widened. "We'll never cross that. It's too deep and our armor too heavy." Arya nodded reluctantly. "Then we'll find a boat as we planned." He looked up and down the river. "I can't see a boat," he commented dully. The girl tutted angrily. "You're so defeatist." She broke from cover and headed upstream. Muttering wordless oaths, Gendry followed. They moved silently for at least 10 minutes before Arya suddenly grabbed Gendry and pushed him behind cover. At his questioning look she put a finger to her lips and then gestured to the other side of the tree they were hiding behind. Carefully, Gendry eased up and saw a long line of longboats on the soft bank of the river ahead. So that's where they crossed. A few guards were patrolling idly in between the vessels as they laid in the sand. "How the hell are we supposed to move those?" Gendry hissed in anguish. "Even if we could steal one, they are too fucking big to get off the riverbank and into the water by ourselves." "I'll think of a way," Arya assured him as she looked over the boats and the men guarding them. "There, I was thinking you had it all planned out already," Gendry whispered. Arya merely rolled her eyes. They sat there for long moments watching and thinking. The sound of the flowing river soothing their troubled thoughts. A commotion drew their interest. They slunk back into the trees as men started to pour from the trees and the field downriver. The air filled with shouts and curses as the soldiers made for the boats. He saw Arya's face whiten. There was fear in her eyes. Fuck. Is the battle over? Are they heading home? As soon as Gendry thought it, he dismissed the notion. If Bolton had won the battle, he'd march his force towards Winterfell to pick off survivors, not head home. Besides, there is something distinctly panicky about these men. They watched as men quickly pushed the boats back into the water. As soon as the boats were safely away from dry land, the men pulled in and started to row towards the eastern shore. Quick! Arya breathed as another group of men headed for the bank. Now's our chance. They ran from cover, keeping their heads down as they followed the party of men as they ran for the nearest boat. Like before, the group swarmed around a few of the vessels and pushed them roughly into the water. Gendry reached up and pulled himself into the vessel. Arya made to do likewise when a hand suddenly shot out to take a grip on her shoulder. The hand belonged to a large, muscled man with a fierce beard and nasty scar down one side of his face. "Where the fuck do you think you're going?" He pulled her away and began to climb into the boat himself. Gendry stepped in and smashed a right hook into the man's face. With a cry of surprise and pain, the man fell back into the water. "Quick!" Gendry shouted at Arya, who surged forward, waist deep in water. She jumped and seized Gendry's hand and, boldly, he yanked her aboard. They both breathed heavily from the momentary panic they had just experienced before looking at the rest of the boat's occupants. The men looked unconcerned, preoccupied as they were with readying their oars to make quick work of the short journey across the river. Ned fought. His force thundered through the remnant of the Bolton camp, but the place was deserted, the occupants having fled in a hurry. He drew his new horse up and looked around quickly. "Any sign?" he asked of his men who were all around him. "None, my lord," Harold Hardang shouted back from away, his face and nose bloody from the battle in the field. A battle now over, with only the dead or injured still out in the open. Ned's men were methodically going through each tent, searching for occupants. Their swords were red, their armor dented, but the men's faces only showed the slightest hint of fatigue. They knew that the day was not yet done. Under Ned's gaze, the men conducted a quick search for any sign or hint of the enemy or their intended location. "I'm sure they are searching for plunder as well. Normally I'd remonstrate with them, but I do not have the time now. I have more important things to attend to than to worry about other men's priorities. Then we push on." He looked over his shoulder. "Harold, form the men up. We charge on the river, hopefully we can cut the enemy off. Leave some men here to continue the search." The youth nodded. "It will be done, my lord." "Good man." Ned wheeled his mount, an unfamiliar beast that he had trouble controlling. "Form up, lads." He shouted to the soldiers around him, "To the river." Roose 8. He rode to the riverbank and spied the chaos going on below. As his eyes searched, he tutted in irritation, annoyed that some of his men had had the audacity to go on ahead of him. The proper form would have been to allow their liege lord to go first. Now, though, he knew that form was the least of his men's concerns. He rode down the rise into the shallows of the water. He swiftly dismounted, his feet splashing as he landed. Without hesitation he released the reins and headed for the nearest boat. Within seconds he was surrounded by his guards, led by Steelshanks Walton. Men stood aside as he climbed into the boat. He ignored their looks of anger and outrage as he and his men took command of the longboat and began to steer it out into the current. "Hey! That thing isn't even half full." Roose didn't turn, but he could tell the voice came from the water below. "Shut your fucking mouth." Walton cursed back. "This is the lord of the dread fort you're squawking at." "Yeah, but for how much longer?" came the muted response. Roose ordinarily would have had the man dismembered for such an insult, but he had neither the time nor inclination for such a thing. His main priority was reaching the bank on the other side of the river. Then to salvage this mess. As his boat cut through the water, Roose considered his next steps. His army was lost. What few remained would never be able to be an effective fighting force again. Today they had had the advantage in numbers, and they had been utterly outplayed by the Starks of Winterfell. Their morale would be destroyed, their will to fight gone. Many men had paid the price of Ramsay's foolishness. Before this is over, I will make sure that Ramsay pays for his actions along with his men. What was worse was that Stark had reserves to call upon from throughout the north. Once the Ryswells and Ironborn were dealt with, then they would march on the dread fort. Even now, Harry on Karstark marched a relief force, several thousand strong, up from Hornwood. The whole of Harry On's army would be made up of Northmen, a great number of them would be nursing grievances with House Bolton and House Carstark. I hope for Arnulf Sake that Cregan was successful in capturing Alis, otherwise I wouldn't want to be him when Harry On arrives at Carhold. Though I doubt he will be any more inclined to me, Roose considered dully. I had his father murdered in the neck. Doubtless young Harry On will have a score to settle with me as well. Ordinarily the situation could be seen as a bleak one for House Bolton. They had no army left, at least not one worthy of the name. There was barely 100 men at arms at the Dread Fort, hardly a worthy counterforce to the thousands that Stark could now field. The situation was dire. Or maybe, not so dire, Roose reflected with a twinkle in his eye as his boat neared the eastern riverbank. He still had Rickon Stark as a hostage. He could still use him to force terms on Lord Eddard. That lad may prove to be most useful. His boat ran aground in the mud of the bank. Smoothly Roose climbed over the side and walked through the reeds until he was on dry land. He looked around, watching his troops stream away into the east without a care for the lord they were abandoning on the riverbank. I'll take my vengeance on them later. He examined the bank, recalling the memory of the topography of the region. Not far at all from where I need to go. He was suddenly approached by a figure he recognized. Ramsay. Hello father, the youth smiled without the barest hint of the calamity he had caused less than an hour before. Little fool costs me an army and acts as if it's all in a day's work. You got to safety, I see, Roose remarked coldly as he strode past his son. I'm your son and heir, Father Ramsay ambled after him. Wouldn't want House Bolton to become extinct now, would we? You're not a Bolton, you're a Snow. Ignoring his son, Roose turned abruptly. Where are the horses? Ramsay whistled and, a short distance away, squires walked towards them leading fresh horses. Well, at least he got that right. Arnulf Karstark went on ahead of us, Ramsay informed his father as they mounted the new horses. Arnulf? Roose asked as he moved his horse forward. Now that he thought of it, he hadn't seen the would-be Lord of Carhold after the war council earlier that day. He got away. Nothing to get away from. Ramsay spit on the ground. The coward fled the battle and crossed the river as soon as he heard the Stark horns. He grinned suddenly. Left his sons to do the fighting. Whereas my family does fight and costs me the battle. If there are gods, they make a mockery of my life. Soon as I arrived and told him what had happened, he rode away. Little fuckers heading for Carhold, Ramsay finished dismissively. Much good will it do him. Then we should retrieve young Rickon. A commotion suddenly sounded by the boats. A boat, next to the one that had transported Roose, had pulled alongside the now abandoned vessel. As the troops had exited the craft, two of the occupants had got into a fight over a young, smaller solider. The big man had thrown his opponent against the side of the boat and was pummeling him hard with large, strong fists. Ramsay watched the fight eagerly. I have no time to watch this. It won't take long for Stark to cross the river. Suddenly more soldiers piled in to help their beleaguered friend. As they passed the smaller solider, they pushed him to the ground angrily. A throaty cry rang out. A female cry. Everyone froze. Roose looked at the downed figure. He frowned. Bring that one to me, he ordered as he watched the large man who had been defending the smaller be subdued by weight of numbers. That one too. The two figure, both little and large, were dragged across the muddy bank and deposited in front of his horse. Lift their heads. The two fought, but eventually their heads were forced upwards to look in Roose's direction. The larger of the two was not one that he recognized. The smaller one, though, there was something familiar about that face. Almost as if I have seen them before. Search them. A quick rummage through their clothes revealed that they were wearing form-fitted armor, something no common solider would wear. Then their weapons were presented to Roose, weapons that had been strapped to their backs and sides. There was the usual collection of knives and swords, but then two weapons gave him pause. My, what an ornate warhammer. Roose, after a cursory examination, handed the weapon to Ramsay, who delighted in the gift. Then he took in the smaller one's sword. It was a dainty weapon, with a sharp point but a full edge. It was also uncommonly short. He looked down the weapon's hilt. Something caught his eyes. I know this mark. He whispered softly. This is Mickan's work, the old blacksmith at Winterfell. The smaller person struggled violently, but the men holding their arms were much bigger and a lot stronger. The youth's struggles amounted to nothing. The larger one also struggled, but he was restrained after Walton slipped a rope round his throat and part choked him so that he had barely had the air to breathe, much less struggle. Roos looked from the sword to the small figure. "You're from Winterfell?" "No," the person cried, trying to hide a distinctly feminine voice. "It is not a question," Roos said, looking coldly at the two. "Evidently you were not there when my son visited a few months ago. In normal circumstance I would ordinarily say that you had relatives there and were looking for vengeance on the evil House Bolton, but the timing of your appearance is extremely interesting." Ramsay laughed menacingly. He urged his horse down the back until he looked at the upturned face of the smaller figure. "This one's a girl." "Fool." "Thank you, Ramsay, I had already worked that out. I cannot believe that the Honorable Ned Stark would approve of women soldiers, which explains your attempts to look like a man. However, it is this sword that I am most interested in." The girl had stopped struggling and was glaring hatefully at him. "Mickon was a renowned blacksmith," Roos spoke aloud, "not exceptionally talented but worthy enough to work within the bounds of Winterfell. He would not make a sword for just anyone. Besides, this is custom made by someone with precise specifications. Only a Stark would have the money or power to order it." So he eyed the girl speculatively. "Either you stole this weapon or you had it made especially for you. Which is it?" The girl refused to respond. After a long moment Roos addressed Ramsay, "Then we shall take her for a thief. Ramsay, remove her hand so that she will remember not to take things that do not belong to her." The girl was forced to the floor with her arm pinned out in front of her. Ramsay got off his horse and advanced towards his helpless victim. To her credit, the girl did not cry out but just stared hatefully at Roos. Just as Ramsay came alongside, the boy exploded into action, throwing two men off with a wild burst of brute strength and struggling valiantly against the others. More men came in to help, but, before they got him back under control, a word escaped him. "Arya." Roos's head snapped round to look at the boy. His head went between the boy and girl, who only now looked somewhat fearful as Ramsay approached her. "Hold." Ramsay looked at his father with frustration. Angered at having his toys taken from him, Roos eyed the girl in wonder. "You are Arya Stark?" The girl shook her head vehemently, though Roos could see tears had sprung from her eyes. "It was not a question," Roos said again. He sat back in his saddle. It made sense now. Not a rush for vengeance but an attempt at rescue. The girl had come to save her brother. How charming. Roos's head turned to the other prisoner. "And who might you be?" "Not another Stark. No, you're much too broad of shoulder to be one of the lean wolves. Are you one of the Southern Knights hoping to assist the fair maiden in her quest?" "Father, we don't have time for this." Ramsay grumbled. "Stark will be right behind us. You were quite happy to spend the time attending to your pleasures. Now you will attend to mine." Ignoring him, Roos addressed the boy once more. "Well. No one," the boy roared angrily. "Ah. Well then, no one will mind if we kill you here and now," Roos replied calmly as he looked at Walton. "Cut his throat." "No." The girl cried for the first time, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I am Arya Stark of Winterfell and this is my father's squire." "Arya, no." The boy thrashed about until Walton struck him a blow about the head. He sagged limply in the arms of his captors. "Don't be too hard on the girl, young man," Roos spoke silkily. "Lady Arya just saved your life." He maneuvered his horse around. "They come with us." It was but a minute's work for the two youths to be tied up and set on horses. That done, Roos's small party quickly left the bank and headed down a small trail. "Where are we going?" Arya Stark yelled. "We're off to visit your brother, my lady," Roos told her with a small smile that failed to reach his eyes. "Now be quiet or I'll have your tongue out." They continued their short ride. Roos thought this new development through. How unbelievably fortuitous to have acquired another Stark as a hostage. The possibilities are endless. I could flay one to show my resolve and then use the other as barter. It was a stroke of good fortune, nothing less. They followed the trail for half an hour, keeping close to the river bank as they traveled north. After a while, Roos observed a large clump of dense woodland. He turned in his saddle. "There we are, my lady. Your wait to see your brother is almost over, your mission a success. Though not quite in the way you intended." They entered the wood from the south. The thicket was so cramped they had no choice but to go down to single file. Their horses neighed unhappily and the men began to look furtively into the trees. Roos sighed. So superstitious. What fools men were. I chose this place to stash precious Rukun because it was so hard to traverse and eerie enough to keep idle passers-by from looking. An ideal hiding place while I was to deal with his father. Though my efforts on that score have certainly suffered a setback today. They pushed on for a moment before they reached a clearing. A dark glade where the trees were so high and thick that the midday sun could barely penetrate the foliage. The air was heavy, the place dark and foreboding. Roos rode into the center of the clearing, his men fanning out behind him as they entered. He could see no one. Repressing his anger, Roos looked around. This was absurd. He had left 20 men guarding Rukun Stark. Red King. He shouted the agreed password. He waited for a moment before repeating the ancient title belonging to his house. There was no response. Find them, he ordered his men. As one they dismounted and spread out in a thin circle. After a moment's hesitation the soldiers entered the trees at the side of the glade. Ramsay and Walton pulled the horses carrying the hostages into the center next to Roos. Both the hostages looked fearful yet angry. Such spirit the Starks and their allies have. Precious moments ticked by, marked only by slight birdsong and the rustle of branches. This is too much. If they can't be found then we'll have to leave without them. I came for a Stark and I still have one, as much as I would like to. My lord. A cry went up from behind Roos. He wheeled his mount to spy a soldier running breathlessly from the trees. What is it? Did you find them? They are dead, my lord. All of them. Roos's eyes widened slightly. How was that possible? Recall the men. He shouted at Walton. Steelshanks quickly pulled a horn from a strap on his back, raised it to his lips and blew a low note. After a moment men emerged from the trees. Roos stared in angered surprise. 3. I sent about 8 on the search. They turned to the original returnee. How did they die? They were in a pile, my lord. About 20 of them, throats slit or arrows filling them. Curses. We will withdraw. It was his only hope. Somehow Stark had outthought him once again and sent a force to extract his son. The boy was likely long gone now. The surviving men ran for their horses, pushing and jostling with each other as they tried to mount the beasts that became skittish at their riders' fear. My lord. Walton said calmly, you should go on ahead. It will be faster if you haven't got the prisoners slowing you down. No. An arrow suddenly appeared in Walton's eye, burying itself deep into the socket and through into the brain. With a start the captain fell from his horse and thudded to the ground. Chaos took over, the men panicked and fled into the woods. Stand your ground. Roos ordered, but no one heard or, if they did, cared to listen. Fucking cowards. Ramsay screamed as he rode after them, trying to bring them back. Ramsay. Roos called after his son, an edge of desperation in his voice, but he received no reply or acknowledgement. He quickly weighed up his choices. Staying here was not an option. He faced a force of indeterminate size and strength and he had no men with which to defend himself. At the same time it was unlikely he could lead his prisoners out of the woods on his own. Not with enemies so close at hand. Just have to kill them now then, and let Stark rue the consequences. Better be quick though. Roos drew the small blade belonging to the Stark girl. He nudged his horse forward until it was alongside the horse onto which she was bound. He reached for her head. A small cut along the throat and then an arrow went through the head of Roos's horse. The beast was dead before it hit the ground, spilling him from the saddle to plummet to the hard ground, the thin blade spinning off into the dirt. Blind terror took over as Roos rolled to his feet and he ran into the trees, fleeing for his life. Gendry v. He saw Roos Bolton fall and run off into the woods. This was his chance. He strained against his bonds, his muscles bulging as they prized apart the rope. He had been working on the cord since he had been set on top of the beast and had prized the bonds loose during the ride. With a guttural moan scream he released himself, pulling apart the loose cords and the restraints fell useless to the floor. In seconds he was free. He gathered himself and looked at Arya. He slipped off his horse and made his way to her. As he reached for her bonds he looked into her eyes. She didn't speak but was looking fearfully behind him. There, anger pulsing off him, was Ramsay. The bastard of Bolton took one look at Gendry and then rode straight towards him, screaming wildly with his sword held above his head. Gendry snarled and dived to the floor, rolling and coming up to his feet just as Ramsay passed him. Quickly Gendry reached up and grabbed the man around the waist and pulled him boldly from the saddle and threw him heavily to the ground. Ramsay cursed in pain as he hit the floor. Gendry neared but his enemy lashed out and struck his kneecap. Gendry dropped to the injured knee as pain shot through him. Ramsay was back on his feet, pulling an oddly shaped knife from a sheath at his side. Without thinking, Gendry threw himself at the other man. One hand grasped his wrist while he smashed his foe repeatedly in the face. Ramsay howled in pain but, in the confusion, managed to get his knife free and jab it towards Gendry's chest. The blade sliced through his cloak but was turned aside by the armor beneath. Gendry suddenly kicked the man in the stomach. He seized the wrist once more and twisted it back on itself. With a shout, Ramsay released the weapon, which dropped harmlessly away. The two youths grappled, throwing wild punches and kicks. Gendry took all the punishment Ramsay could give before responding, badly beating the man with his fists, using them as heavy clubs that smashed into his enemy's unprotected face. Then Ramsay stepped in close and head-butted Gendry, hard. White light exploded behind Gendry's eyes. The pain was excruciating as he fell back in a daze. As he shook his head to clear it, he heard the distinctive sound of a hammer being slipped from its sheath. Ahead of him, Gendry saw that Ramsay was wielding his hammer across his chest. The man smiled, a rictus scrim of bloody lips and smashed teeth. "Once I beat you with your own weapon, I'm going to rape your little friend to death." An icy calm took hold of Gendry. He expected to feel nothing but rage, but, instead, something else happened. His senses focused, his vision cleared, and he settled back into a ready stance that even Syrio Floral would have been proud of. "First you come through me," he said defiantly. Ramsay's grin wavered, but then he started forward. He swung the hammer but, being unused to the weight, he misjudged the angle and it sailed past Gendry to smash into the floor. Gendry punched the man about the face as he stamped down on the hand that still grasped the hammer. His enemy howled in pain as he stepped back. Nursing an injured hand to his chest, he glared in abject hatred at him. "Why, you little..." Ramsay's eyes bulged. He tried to speak but no sound came out. He twisted round to face something behind him. Embedded between Ramsay's shoulder blades was Needle. The bastard of Bolton mumbled incoherently. His hand reached behind in a vain attempt to pull the blade free. Blood was flowing from his lips. However, despite the injury, he still took a haltering step towards Arya. Ramsay's hand was outstretched. His intention to do harm was clear. Gendry reached down and swept his hammer from the floor. He bounded forward and smashed the hammer head across the back of Ramsay's leg. With a cry of agony, the man fell to his knees. Gendry didn't hesitate as he whirled the hammer about his own head and then landed it squarely in the center of Ramsay's skull. Blood and brain matter exploded across the front of Gendry's clothes and face. He released the hammer, now nestled in the other man's head, and, without support, the corpse fell sideways into the muddy earth. Looking around, he saw Arya, who was staring wide-eyed between Gendry and Ramsay's body. Abruptly her gaze became calm. "Good thing I was here to help, wasn't it?" Smiling with relief, tension and even love, he drew her into a deep embrace. Ramsay's blood and brains stained her clothes, but neither of them cared. Ruse 9. He ran as he had never run before, keeping as low as he could as he rounded trees, using bushes for cover in his headlong flight to safety. A thought occurred to him that this was hardly fitting conduct of a highborn lord, but he was long since past caring. Conduct is for those who can afford it. He stopped by a tree, breathing hard. Gods, his armor was heavy, but he dared not lose it, not with enemies somewhere in the trees. He knew he could not be far from the opening to the woods. He skulked through the shadows, mindful now of creating too much sound. It had all gone wrong, he reflected. A year ago he was the commander of a significant portion of the Northern Army. A victorious army at that. They had saved the Riverlands and were marching successfully on the Westerlands, on Casterly Rock itself. Now, though he was a fugitive, his army gone, his retainers scattered, even his own son had seemingly deserted him. A bastard son, but still. He never should have agreed to Lord Tywin's plan. He had thought to have had power and dominion over all the North. Kill Robb Stark and his new queen and lead the North in the spirit of vengeance. But it had all disappeared, a slowly shrinking sphere of influence that looked to be diminishing with each passing breath. Oh, it would have been sweet. Bring the Starks low, an act that even my ancestors never accomplished, while making all the other noble houses bow in submission. The path ahead had seemed bright. Now, there was nothing but darkness. Much like the path ahead of me in this damned wood. It was over now. Roose knew. Without a hostage there was no way that he could force Ned Stark to come to terms. The Warden of the North would lead his victorious army on the Dread Fort. Roose would either be surrendered by his own men to be executed in front of the realm or be killed fighting. Roose chose neither option. He would head back to his castle seat to acquire provisions and then make a decision on his next move. His first choice would be to flee to Essos. The long hand of House Stark did not reach across the narrow sea. He would go into exile like Lord Mormont's son once did when he became a slaver. And if that failed? Well, there was always Castle Black and the Night's Watch. Ned Stark would never dare harm a man who had taken the black and sworn his vows. Smiling, Roose pushed on. So lost in his own thoughts he almost missed the man who suddenly appeared on the path ahead of him. Roose blinked. One moment the trail ahead was empty, the next a lone stranger blocked his path. A hooded man, cast in shadow. Though, was it a stranger? Roose thought he recognized the man. He brandished his broadsword. "Out of my way." "I think not," was the only, hollow, response. Roose felt his temper fray. "Who the hell do you think you are? One who would hold you to your oath of loyalty." He could not see the man's eyes, could not even see his mouth move as he talked. Roose waved his sword. "Either you move aside willingly or I will strike you down and walk over your corpse." "Brave words, Red King, but I doubt you're man enough for it." The figure pulled back his cloak to reveal a row of small daggers lining his belt. "Surrender and submit yourself to the Warden of the North's judgment." Roose laughed hotly. It was really too much. The man against him was a slight lean thing, almost the size of an adolescent rather than a northern warrior. He could not hope to stand against the Lord of the Dread Fort. "Knives do not scare me, you fool. House Bolton has been using them for centuries." The man did not seem cowed, and always for dishonorable purposes. Roose's temper snapped. He strode forward. "Enough. Acknowledge your betters and stand aside." His boots sounded heavily against the dry earth. "You dare to threaten the Lord of the Dread Fort? I have been killing grown men for decades, you'll just be one more. What say you to that?" There was a glint of metal as a knife flew towards him, end over end. It passed close by Roose's head, grazing his throat before flying on and slamming into a tree behind him. Roose jerked instinctively as the blade passed before righting himself to face the man ahead of him. He tried to speak, to let the man know he had missed, and gloat at his misfortune, but no sound escaped his lips. His neck was on fire. His hand raced up to touch his throat and it came away coated in red sticky liquid. He opened the side of my throat. "I say you talk too much." Roose heard the voice off into the distance, but it was away, far, far away. His legs buckled beneath him and he sank to the earth. From this angle the tree seemed even taller and more menacing than before. Darkness began to creep into the edges of his sight. Curiously, there was no pain now, even though he could vaguely feel the torrent of blood course through the wound in his neck to run down his body and pool on the ground below. His eyesight darkened once more. He looked up. The hooded figure filled his vision. There was nothing but the man who stood above him watching him die. And to think, I thought him of no consequence. Roose tried one last time to speak, but there were no vocal cords left to obey him. He looked up to see the figure pull back his cloak to reveal a short sword. On the man's surcoat was a brooch made of metal fashioned in the shape of a lizard chasing its own tail. Howland Reed. The figure looked down at him with a cold, hard expression, barely visible through the hood. He pulled the sword back above his head. "Ned Stark sends his regards." The blade swept down. Chapter 64, Daenerys v. Chapter text. "Is there anything more you can tell us?" The Maester looked up from his work, his face twisted in curiosity. "He's dead, Your Grace." "I don't know what else I can tell you." She bit back a sharp retort. "Patience, I must have patience. Well, perhaps you could start with telling us how he died. The look of puzzlement became one of slight exasperation. He fell from a great height, your grace. His skull and back are broken in several places. The maester pointed at what was left of Tommen Baratheon's head that was now nothing more than a ruin of blood, bone and blonde hair. The cause of death would seem to be obvious. Maybe there is a reason the Citadel saw fit to send this one to me. Maybe his attitude is a studied insult from them now that the maesters have thrown their support behind Robb Stark. The soft sounding of swishing silk along with the padding of approaching feet came from the corner of the room. I'm sure Her Grace is grateful for your penetrating insight, Maester Marwyn Varys uttered softly, but I believe we would be grateful for more information. Anything you could tell us could prove invaluable. Dany nodded gratefully to Lord Varys. The headache was becoming worse. Much worse. Maester Marwyn sniffed and he stepped away from the examination table. He turned his back on the two of them and plunged his hands into a bowl of water, washing the blood and brains from the limbs. The fall is definitely the reason for the boy's demise, Marwyn offered as he spoke over his shoulder. There is no other injury to the body. No stab wounds or the like. The heavyset man stopped cleaning his hands and paused to dry them on a cloth set next to the bowl. As he wiped his hands he turned towards them. Indeed, aside from the injuries caused by the fall, there are no signs of violence on the body whatsoever. At last we're getting somewhere. So, he did fall. The maester smiled, showing his red teeth. He scratched at an itch that seemed to be plaguing his nose. Oh, he definitely fell, your grace. Regrettably, I can't say what happened before he took his unfortunate plunge. I can tell you there are no lacerations or abrasions on the body save those that can be explained away by the fall itself. Dany glanced towards the body on the table. So there was no struggle. It is unlikely that foul play was involved. The maester eyed her shrewdly. The boy was little more than 9 years old. Nor was he particularly big and strong. I doubt he could have put up a struggle, even if he had wanted to. The Queen nodded gloomily. It was as she had feared. There would likely be no way to verify the truth of what happened up on that walkway. Have the body turned over to the faith for burial at the Great September. Dany ordered as she turned away from the corpse. Is that wise, your grace? Marwyn asked. We gave no such consideration to his brother. Dany rounded on the man. Your role is to do as I command, not to question my orders. The maester bowed, but the expression on his face was one of insolence. The Queen took a calming breath. You must forgive the tone, maester. I am very busy. Think nothing of it, your grace, Marwyn said, examining her in much the same manner as he had Tommen's body mere moments before. It will be as you command. He rang a bell for some servants to carry out the body. As the corpse was taken away, the maester addressed her once again. If that is all, your grace, may I be excused? Mokaro has asked me to help him in examining the dragon horn. Those two are as thick as thieves. I should join them at some point to determine just what it is they are doing in the Godswood with my children and that horn they are so interested in. She thanked the maester for his service and then walked from his chambers. Marwyn's rooms, chambers that were normally set aside for the Grand Maester and that had been Pycelle's home for many years, were now stripped bare. Since his arrival, Marwyn had been moving his predecessor's belongings out, deriding the old man's possessions as nothing more than trivial pieces of junk. Dany became aware that Varys was just behind her shoulder. He did not speak, he did not have to. The situation in the capital was going from bad to worse, and this latest development was only going to add to the veritable plague of problems. It was made worse by the fact that, as yet, she had no plan to resolve the numerous issues that dogged at her. With a heavy heart she made her way to her solar. That evening, she stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Behind her the lords of the small council had gathered minus Lord Victorian, the master of ships. Lord Connington had dispatched the Ironborn captain to Rook's Rest in the Crown Lands in order to assess the strength of the host there and determine their viability as a fighting force. At least, that's the official reason for the visit. Unofficially, it will do no harm to have the sailors in the Iron Fleet away from the capital. The Ironborn were notorious for causing trouble for the citizens of the city with their constant stealing, their propensity for violence and even, in a few cases, raping a few hapless maidens as they walked the streets of King's Landing. Once the first such crime had occurred with little or no consequence, the attacks had escalated markedly. The next few days saw a spate of attacks that had culminated in an alehouse where a woman had been raped in front of the other patrons who had been made to watch in dumbstruck fear. After the attacks were reported to Dany, she had been apoplectic. She had enough to be dealing with without her own soldiers stirring up the city's populace against them. Not to mention the fact that the Dragon Queen took an extremely dim view of attacks on the innocent and vulnerable. It was not something she was prepared to tolerate. She informed Victorian that either he punished the perpetrators or she would be forced to do so herself. In response, the Dog Greyjoy captain had the rapists castrated and strung up by the city walls where they hung for a night and day before being burned alive as a sacrifice to the Red God, Arla. Burned, she knew, not for the crime of violating women but for disobeying Victorian's strict order that the women of the city were not to be touched. A gesture he had made in order to attempt to charm his new queen. Either way, the point was made and the attacks ceased. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done. The city's populace, already wavering in their contentment with their rulers, were now verging on open revolt. A situation not assisted by the continued work of the Faith and the High Septon. I must deal with this soon. The guards all tell the same tale. Dany turned her attention away from the city vista and back to the table behind her. Her betrothed, Aegon, was sitting at the head of the table looking intently at Jorah Mormont, who was speaking from the seat beside Dany's empty chair. All of them? Aegon asked, his voice heavy with skepticism. All 6. Jorah confirmed, leaning forward to fold his arms on the heavy oak table. I've questioned them all individually and they all have the same story. Which was? Aegon prompted. Jorah made a face. He knows that Aegon is well aware of that happened. He believes him to be playing some game. She watched the commander of the city watch take a breath. The gold cloaks were moving the boy from the black cells to a new room within the Red Keep. It was slow going, the prisoner was distraught, having just learned of his brother's death. How did you let that happen? Aegon asked. A flash of irritation crossed Mormont's face. It was an honest mistake. One of the guards let slip what had happened to Joffrey. A very convenient oversight, Dany thought as she slowly took her seat beside Aegon. The boy was upset, crying, screaming for his mother, but the guards pushed on. They got him out of the cells and started to take him up to one of the towers in Maegor's Holdfast, as per their instructions. It is my fault. I had ordered the boy moved to more comfortable quarters in the hope that this would mollify the Starks after the death of Joffrey. She sighed, his death is on my hands. Jorah was looking at her with a querying expression. Dany indicated that he should continue his story. What can be the harm in hearing this again? It doesn't make the boy any less dead. At her urging, Jorah turned to address the rest of the small council. On the way to the new chambers, the boy managed to slip his guards and flee. Who allowed that? Aegon demanded, his eyebrows raised. It wasn't the case of allowing it, Jorah stated, his voice clipped. The boy simply ducked under one of the guards' arms and ran down a corridor. Again, I ask for the second time, Aegon asked angrily, how could that occur? You've just told us that he had 6 guards with him. I would have thought that sufficient to control a young child. Jorah's mouth had become a tight line. The number of guards were to deter anyone from attempting to harm or kidnap the boy. He grimaced at the irony of his words. The idea of him running wasn't considered. As it was, he didn't get far enough for him to fall to his death. Unfortunately, Jorah finished. The boy lost his footing on a walkway and fell several floors onto the stone courtyard below. He died instantly. And this was confirmed by all the witnesses. Lord Connington inquired sharply. Yes, my lord, Mormont replied, his tone regretful. The boy was panicked and fell. It was a tragic accident. 7 hells, Aegon muttered. This is a disaster. The Starks will almost certainly back away from the alliance now. And isn't that exactly what you want? Dany mused darkly. She observed her betrothed and was startled to see an earnest expression on his face. I'd have thought the prospect of a war would have him salivating. Ruling isn't turning out to be as easy as one would want it to be. I have spoken to Robb Stark already, Dany assured them all. He and Margaery Tyrell have returned to their camp to consider the situation. This is precisely what I mean, Aegon declared. The alliance is supposed to have been signed weeks ago. Now, at best, there will be an even further delay. This must be resolved. We can't tolerate the Stark army on our doorstep for much longer. I'm not entirely certain that's accurate, Your Grace. Varys offered. The Stark host's presence is extremely popular with the population of Antlers and the surrounding small folk. How can that be? Connington scoffed. An army of that size has to be stripping the land of all food. Not to mention that any army is bound to contain brigands and ruffians. In normal circumstances they'd be terrorizing the people, alienating them with theft and rape, or at the least, causing public discontent with soldiers' normal drunken antics. You have a dim view of men, my lord. Dany remarked, appalled by the cynicism and matter-of-fact way the Hand had expressed his view. It's reality, Khaleesi Mormont commented. It's a hard truth that armies are little more than beasts that operate accordingly to the baser natures. With the exception of the Unsullied, of course. Yes, I would imagine that having your manhood taken from you at such a young age would suppress certain urges. Truth or not, Varys interjected, it seems to be irrelevant in this case. It would appear that the Starks have a tight rein on their men. There are no reports, or even rumors, of theft or rape from the army. The soldiers pay for their food and refreshment and do not abuse the locals. That can't be right. Connington objected. Even experienced sellsword companies have problems with discipline. Such problems did exist for a short time after their arrival, Varys said, but the King and Queen issued strict orders about the troops' conduct. Punishment for transgression is swift and harsh. Even a knight has been beheaded for breaking the law. Interesting. It would appear, Varys finished, that the young wolf has the same view of justice as Lord Eddard. Very well, the Hand said grudgingly, but that doesn't account for the provisions required to supply such a force. There are regular supply convoys from the Reach, Varys added. They arrive on a daily basis. The same carts and wagons that serve the city also go on to the Stark camp. What must be like to be able to command those kinds of resources? Dany thought bitterly. She abruptly dismissed the thought. Let us return to the issue at hand. Lord Varys, do we believe the Starks will yet sign the alliance treaty? The Master of Whisperers looked pensive. I am not sure, Your Grace. My little birds are working tirelessly to provide information from the Stark camp, but, as yet, we have been unable to determine exactly what the impact of young Tommen's death will be. I'd have thought that would be obvious, Aegon snorted, leaning back and folding his arms across his chest. If Robb Stark's reaction to the news is any indication, then the alliance could be as good as dead. And isn't that exactly what you wanted? Dany eyed him angrily. The young Dragon King saw her expression and gave her a contrite look in return. This cannot be allowed, the Hand rumbled determinedly. Urgent representations need to be made to the Starks immediately. There must be a way to remedy this situation. Is that necessary? Dany glanced across towards the far wall of the small council chamber. There, leaning against the wall, was Lysa Nomur, the spymaster of the Golden Company. The lithe, skeletal figure had attended recent meetings of the small council at Connington's request. She glared at him. You have something to add, sir? The man gave a quick bow. Please forgive the intrusion, Your Grace. Perhaps I should not have spoken. Too late for that now, Jon Connington muttered. Best say your piece. I'm obliged, my lord. Lysa Nomur gave another quick bow before turning his head to Dany and Aegon. Your Graces, it occurs to me that there is a danger of us being too keen, overeager even, to sign a treaty with the Stark-Tyrell alliance. How so? Doran Martell asked from the confines of his wheelchair. The Prince of Dorne had his hands clasped gently in his lap, though his eyes were ever alert and watchful. It has already been decided that a pact between our two forces is the way forward. And I do not mean to question the wisdom of that decision, Lysa purred softly. I would merely submit that there is a real danger of us seeming desperate if we push too hard. Desperate? How right you are. We are not desperate, Aegon stressed, though I think we can agree that if a treaty is not signed that it will lead to war. A devastating war that will cause unbelievable harm to the Seven Kingdoms. Dany was stunned. It took all her willpower to hide her shock. Gods, he sounds genuine. Where has this change of heart come from? But Your Grace, Lysa began. Enough. Aegon declared loudly, bringing a fist down on the council table with a dull thump. I appreciate the sentiment, but everyone both here and at the Stark camp knows the stakes involved in this. The youth sighed deeply. The Lannister boy's death is regrettable, but if the commander of the City Watch is convinced it is an accident, then I am certain we can accept it as such. The king swept his eyes around the table. The task at hand is to ensure that the Starks are shown the truth of the matter, that it was an accident, and that we can now move on. Dany couldn't help it. She gaped at her betrothed in absolute astonishment. She had been convinced that Aegon's earlier attempts at geniality towards the Starks after the duel between Clegane and Prince Oberyn had been nothing but an act. But now, even when surrounded by trusted counselors, the young king was maintaining his outlook. "I will make representations to the Starks," Dany said determinedly. "Robb Stark is a reasonable man. I don't believe he would jeopardize the treaty over an accident." "He might," Connington said, caution in his tone. He was quite specific that no harm should come to Cersei Lannister's children. "Now, 2 of them are dead." "Tommen's death was an accident," Jorah objected. "Preventable, certainly, and in this I am to blame Khaleesi, but Joffrey's death was by his own hand. We never anticipated that." "Indeed. Another oversight. The choice before the Starks is either to believe we are malicious child killers or incompetent fools. What a quandary." "Perhaps the Lord Hand spoke. We should consider moving Myrcella Baratheon into the capital so that she can be properly guarded. Just in case there is anything else we have failed to anticipate." He glared around the table. "At least such an action would show the Starks that we are taking her safety seriously." Magister Illyrio was nodding, but Doran Martell's face was as hard as stone. "The girl Myrcella is perfectly safe in the Dornish part of the host's encampment." Lord Connington grimaced. "I will not argue with you, Prince Doran, but the girl has supporters and enemies in equal measure. The Faith have already declared her the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. We should redouble her guard." "An action I have already taken," Doran relied frostily. "I have her tent surrounded and she is accompanied by a personal retinue including 2 of my nieces at all times. More of the Sand Snakes. If they are anything like their father in combat, I would not want to be the one to face them." The Master of Laws turned his attention to the head of the table. "The Lady Myrcella stays where she is." Aegon bristled at his uncle's defiance, but Dany leaned forward, speaking before he could say anything rash. "The Lord Hand is wise to suggest such a course. However, I cannot help but note that Myrcella's brothers met their end while within the walls of the Red Keep itself. A place thought to be the most secure in the Seven Kingdoms. They were not safe here. Who is to say that the girl would be any safer?" "But your Grace," Connington protested. "The answer is no, my lord," Dany declared. "Myrcella stays under the protection of Prince Doran and his family. I will not make the mistake of presuming that the city is safe anymore. Joffrey's and Tommen's death are simply too convenient and suspicious to be overlooked." "It shall be as Queen Daenerys orders," Aegon spoke up, looking pointedly at Lord Connington. He looked around the table. "As for the Starks, the Queen will make her representations. In the meantime we should consider other matters." The king fixed his eyes again on Lord Connington. "What else do you have to report?" "Your Graces," Connington shifted in his seat, "I will like to inform you both that the relief of the Dornish forces by the Unsullied in the Stormlands has been completed. The Dornish troops are marching here and will be in the sight of the city by midday tomorrow." "About time. Have there been any problems with the changeover?" Connington regarded her. "None as yet, your Grace. The small folk of the Stormlands have never encountered the Unsullied. There is not the same history of enmity between them that existed with the Dornish. As such, they are being cautious in their approach to them, and both our soldiers and the people seem to have settled down. I will of course keep a close eye on the situation." "Make sure you do," Dany remarked. "We must maintain order in the region, otherwise we risk being cut off from Dorne. By land at least." "As your Grace commands," Connington replied, showing not the slightest irritation at her words. "If the situation deteriorates I will journey there myself to ensure the peace." "Good," Aegon noted. He turned to Maester Marwyn. "Any word from Lord Victorian?" "The Lord Captain has arrived at Rook's Rest," Marwyn reported, sifting through a pile of scrolls before him. "He has met the local lords and commanders of Cracklaw Point and has begun to inspect the troops there." "What does Victorian Greyjoy know of inspecting men? How many troops does he have?" Aegon asked curiously. Connington's face was cold. "A great number of the Lannister deserters fled either here or into the Crown Lands, where they were co-opted into service by local houses. All told, Lord Victorian reports that he has an additional 2,000 men waiting to be commanded." "Excellent," Aegon declared. "And what of the Lannister men who fled here after their defeat at Harrenhal?" The Lord of Griffin's Roost smiled dryly. At your Grace's command we offered the men service, and I am pleased to report that a great number accepted your offer. Of course they did, it was either that or starve. Sir Jorah and I assessed the men, Connington continued, and allocated them between the Golden Company, which has now replenished its numbers from the battle fought against Stannis, and the Gold Cloaks. The recruits are not, perhaps, the finest we could wish for, Jorah commented, but they will serve. Good, Dany said, giving a brief nod of satisfaction. What next? Illyrio Mopethys, the master of coin, looked like he was about to speak, but Jorah cut across him. I regret to tell you, your Grace, that we are finding the city is getting tougher to control. There were 5 separate incidents during the day and 11 of my men were injured. None fatally, but even so. The work of the High Septon? Aegon asked rhetorically as he looked to Varys for confirmation. The eunuch nodded firmly. Indeed, your Grace. Meetings, led by Septons and the Sparrows, are now being held throughout the city morning, noon and night. They serve to inflame the people against us. Did we not declare such meetings illegal? Aegon asked, his voice as hard as stone. We did, your Grace, Varys confirmed, but the meetings have sentries who alert the group to the approach of the Gold Cloaks before they can arrive to effect any arrests. Have the patrols doubled, Aegon ordered, directing his words at the commander of the city watch. The Lord Hand and I have conceived a plan to try and infiltrate the groups to gain information about their whereabouts and numbers, Jorah noted. We aim to arrest the ringleaders and, ultimately, get close to the High Septon so that we can arraign him on charges of treason. How can you get so close? Aegon inquired. Surely the Faith knows the members of its damned group. It does, your Grace, Prince Doran stated. Sir Jorah and Lord Connington are working on the street gangs causing trouble. Lord Varys and I are concentrating our efforts on the High Septon. How fitting, the soldiers fight the lower ranks while my strategists go after the general. A role perfect for all involved. You, uncle? Aegon asked, surprised. How can you assist? You'd be surprised, nephew, Doran assured him, of how useful I can be. As of this morning, one loyal to your Graces has successfully infiltrated the Great September and has begun her task of gathering intelligence while adopting the guise of a Septar. Who? Aegon asked suspiciously. Who could gain entry so fast? Doran glanced around the table as if checking he could trust the people present. Your cousin Tyon. She is a young woman of incomparable skills. No one spoke. Dany cleared her throat. Then it seems you have things well in order. And not before time. The High Septon's actions are getting out of hand. Violence and civil disobedience was increasing across the capital at a marked rate, despite the food convoys continuing to flow from the Reach. Lord Varys had reported that the High Septon had started to use the deaths of Robert Baratheon's sons as a rallying cry amongst the poorest of the people. What had started as small groups of malcontents were fast becoming an army. Dany was glad that her small council had acted precipitously to deal with the threat. Your Graces, I must speak. Dany turned to look at the other side of the table. There, clad in robes of finest silk and ermine, sat Magister Illyrio. The man, usually so cheerful and pleasant, sported an ugly frown that creased his swollen face. Apologies, Magister, Dany said softly. We have presumed enough upon your patience. Please, speak. I am obliged, your Grace, the fat Magister said, sucking in a deep lungful of air, as if needing replenishment from the exertion of speaking. I must inform the council of a great problem afflicting your rule. The Faith will be dealt with, Connington assured him slowly. Not the Faith, Illyrio waved a hand as if swatting aside a bothersome gnat. No, this problem is far more vital than a group of troublesome clerics with nothing better to do with their time than cause strife. Pray tell, Dany said, concern worrying at the edges of her consciousness. Your Grace, Illyrio spoke in small measured gasps. I must inform you all that the state of the realm's finances have reached such a declined state that I doubt they will be able to recover. At least not for years. Dany felt the council's dismay, saw the look of derision upon the members' faces. We have more urgent things to deal with than gold, Aegon grumbled. There is an army outside our walls and rebellious factions springing up inside our own territory. We needs must deal with them before anything else. And how does His Grace believe we will be able to accomplish this once the money runs out and we are unable to pay the troops that you would otherwise use to deal with these problems? The council was surprised by the biting tone of the Magister. Illyrio, usually so unflappable and charming, was now glaring angrily at the Dragon King. I only meant, Egon replied in a measured voice, that we can look to finances after we have achieved peace in our lands. By then, I fear it will be too late. Illyrio said, wiping his sweaty face with the palm of his hand. We are on the verge of bankruptcy. How can that be? Egon spluttered, we have the wealth of the city and 3 regions to our name. Dany agreed, but then she saw doubt and consternation on the faces of Connington, Varys and Prince Doran. The 3 councillors looked uncomfortable, glancing at each other in quick furtive exchanges. Please explain, Magister, she said evenly, we have not yet had time to examine the realm's finances. The Master of Coin looked slightly frustrated but then calmed himself. It is with deep regret that I must report that the Iron Throne is currently in debt to the tune of 7 million gold pieces. What? Dany was stunned. How could you let this happen? Egon exclaimed in shock and anger. The Magister adjusted his position in his chair. Your Graces should know that the fault is not mine. Robert Baratheon and his heirs are responsible. If the usurper ran up the debt during his tenure, then that is his problem. Egon said dismissively, his face hard. Let the debtors pull apart his grave at Storm's End if they desire their money back. Illyrio looked angrily at the young king. Would that this issue could be so simply resolved, Your Grace. Even your proclamation that Robert Baratheon's reign was invalid and should be stricken from the records will not avail us here. Egon opened his mouth to speak, but Dany jumped in first. Who do we owe all this money to? The fat Magister set a piece of parchment in front of him. Of the 7 million gold pieces, half is owed to House Lannister. It seems that despite being connected by marriage to the ruling house and having his grandson on the throne, Lord Tywine was careful enough to ensure that any money loaned to the throne was dutifully recorded for the purposes of repayment. That is hardly a concern now, Lord Connington noted dryly. The Lannisters are hardly in a position to collect on that debt. The head of their house is dead, their army scattered, and the principal members of the house are in our dungeon. Or with the faith, Mopethys commented with a glint in his eye. Dany fought to keep her mouth from dropping open. Cersei Lannister, of course. It was as if the scales of stupidity had fallen from her eyes. It all made sense now. She had thought it odd that the High Septon, a man of fanatical piety, had requested that the former queen be surrendered into his custody. What reason would such a man have to try Cersei? If she is guilty of incest and adultery, the faith's preferred candidate for the throne would be void. Now though the old man's plans were revealed. You believe him to be using her to try and claim the Lannister portion of the debts? I do, Your Grace, Illyrio confirmed. He indicated Connington. As the Lord Hand pointed out, I was prepared to dismiss the vast sum owed to the Lannisters. They are, after all, our hostages with no way to press for payment of the debt. However, since we have turned over the former Queen Regent, the Faith has been using this fact as a means to claim the money belongs to her. Several Septons have already requested an audience with me. Ridiculous. Egon spat, his eyes all fire and hatred. Cersei was the wife of the usurper. She cannot possibly think that we will make good on her debts. The initial case made by the Faith involved them pressing for payment to be made to, first Tommen, and now the Lady Myrcella rather than the former queen herself. That's absurd, Connington declared. The king's proclamation aside, the Lannisters effectively ruled the 7 kingdoms, first under the usurper and then Joffrey. Any debts they ran up in that time is surely money that they gave to themselves. Nevertheless, Mopethys declared doggedly, the records indicate that the money from House Lannister, now standing at around the 3.5 million mark, was a loan and was always meant to be repaid. Agreements made between the Iron Throne under the usurper's rule mean nothing, Egon stated coldly. The girl will get not 1 copper from us. Oh, I doubt the High Septon expects to see the money, Your Grace, the Magister reasoned. The problem is presentational. If you argue that the Lannisters lent money to the crown and, since you are now the crown, it follows that you owe them the money. If, however, you argue that the Lannisters were ruling and merely loaned themselves the money, then you need not pay. You then have to concede that the Lannisters have a legitimate claim to the throne. Semantic nonsense. Egon cried, slapping the table with the palm of his hand, a game for maesters and scholars and not one for the real world. Take the argument to the taverns of King's Landing and see how that goes over. Doubtless Your Grace is correct, Mopethys conceded wryly with a nod of his head, but, while the situation is unresolved, the faith is using it a propaganda piece to say that the new rulers of the city will not make good on their debts. Nonsense. It is not nonsense. Conington noted, concern all over his face. If a king's word cannot be trusted, or at least, is believed not to be trusted, then faith in their leadership deteriorates. It was not our word. Egon cried heatedly. We were not in charge when the loans were extended. You're right, of course, Conington sighed, but the truth is of little consequence. It's what others will make of it that is of concern. Indeed, Varys agreed. Already the Septons preach across the city that the king and queen's word is worth nothing. Tied into this is the accusation that your graces have ordered the murders of Joffrey and Tommen. It is a poisonous mix that is turning the people against the Iron Throne. If we allow this High Septon to continue to build this narrative, then our problems will only escalate. Intolerable. Egon fumed from his seat. What about the rest of the money? Dany asked suddenly. The amount the crown owes the Lannisters amounts to only half the debt you referred to. The rest of the money, Magister Illyrio intoned, is owed to the Iron Bank of Bravos. He talks so solemnly he might as well have been pronouncing a death sentence. Dany searched the faces of the men before her. All of them looked unhappy with the news that had just been presented to them. Forgive me, my lords, but I am not familiar with this organization, Dany confessed. I have only heard of them in passing. Khaleesi Sajora explained, the Iron Bank is one of the wealthiest banks in Essos. It is a secretive institution which lends money the world over and counts lords and kings amongst its clients. But that is not why they are so infamous, Conington said from his place at the table, for that you have to look at its reputation for collecting debts. The Iron Bank will have its due, Marwyn recited, simple words, your grace, but their meaning is clear. For centuries the bank has cultivated a fearsome legacy for utilizing unconventional tactics for reclaiming what they are owed. Dany felt her irritation rise. Speak plainly, my lords. Now is not the time to mince words. Marwyn nodded obediently. Put simply, your grace. If a king or prince is foolish enough to default on his debts, then the bank turns to rivals, pretenders and usurpers and funds their efforts to replace the defaulter. If they are successful, then surely the original debt will be lost. Dany reasoned. The Maester smiled at her. Not so, your grace. The new ruler agrees to pay back the loan as well as the money the bank has made available for the campaign. In the end, the Iron Bank always comes out on top. And now they think to do so here. Dany said rhetorically, tapping her fingers on the heavy wooden table as she pondered this latest complication. It is problematic, your grace, Mopethys empathized. We have not the money to repay what is owed. The bank will not be swayed by the idea that they loaned the vast sums to the Baratheons and Lannisters. As far as the bank is concerned, they lent the money to the Iron Throne. Your graces are the occupiers of said throne and, as such, are liable for the crown's debts. We are surrounded by rivals that the Iron Bank could support. We dare not default. Can the money be raised? Egon asked urgently. In normal circumstance it would be hard, the Master of Coin replied. Under the present circumstances it would be impossible. We sit in the biggest city in Westeros, Egon cried, with the major port and trade lanes that come with it. The funds raised from that, Mopethys explained, are being exhausted by paying for our armies. As it is, I have had to supplement paying for our sellsword army from my own resources in Essos. Dany fought the urge to roll her eyes. Despite being initially generous of his funds, Magister Illyrio had slowly become more and more reluctant to supplement the crown's treasury from his own funds. The last few council meetings had involved some kind of interjection about the cost of running the realm. Though he has made clear that the money he has given us is just a loan. Given time, I'm sure that Magister Illyrio will recoup his money, with interest. It would be different if we ruled the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms, the Master of Coin noted sourly. As it is, we are heavily extended financially, with massive debts and no way to make good on them. Dany nodded. He's right, of course. Unchecked, this situation could escalate into disaster. Maybe we could prevail upon Robb Stark. Varys suggested, one day this kingdom will belong to his children as well as to your grace's offspring. Maybe he could be convinced to shoulder some of the burden of the debt owed to the Iron Bank. The Starks currently occupy a vast portion of the realm, Prince Doran reminded the room, including the Reach and Westerlands, which are, by far, the richest regions of Westeros. While their territory has been hard hit by war, they are doubtless in a better position than us to repay such a large debt. Why should they help us? Connington asked with a dismissive wave of his hand. From their point of view the debt is ours and ours alone. The Starks are not unreasonable, Varys answered the hand with a small smile. If it is presented in such a way that Westeros itself owes such a debt, then surely Robb Stark's honor can be invoked to help share the repayments. Ah, yes, the vaunted Stark honor. Riding to the rescue once more. They would have to be fools of the highest order, Connington muttered with an air of despondency. Absent an alliance they have no incentive to help us, and, even then, they still might allow us to be crushed under the weight of such a debt. Even more reason to have this alliance formalized, Dany said, standing from her chair. With the Queen rising, the council followed suit save Prince Doran, who remained seated in his wheelchair though he affected to straighten his pose. My lords, Dany declared firmly, there is much to be done and it is vital we move quickly. Lord Connington, Ser Jorah, Prince Doran and Lord Varys are to continue their efforts to undermine the High Septon. The suit made by the Faith regarding the money owed to House Lannister is to go unanswered. Tell the Septons that the Master of Coin is still getting to grips with the ledgers and that Maester Marwyn is examining the previous agreements. Say anything you like, just buy us time. She turned to Magister Illyrio himself. I suspect that such excuses will fall on deaf ears as far as the Iron Bank is concerned. When their representatives next seek an audience, send them to me. I will assure them we take the debt seriously and will promise to repay them. And how will we do that? Mopethys asked with a puzzled frown. The fact remains we do not have the money. I will ask the Starks for assistance, Dany said, swallowing her pride. I will speak to the young wolf and his queen and ask them for aid. The taste of such words were bitter on her tongue, but she knew she had no other option. The truth here is that we have no choice here. Either we bind the Starks to our side or we risk the Iron Bank using them against us. That we cannot allow. Agreed. Aegon stated, though by the look of his face he was no happier with the situation than Dany was. Dany felt surprise once again. She examined Aegon's face, but, aside from the same look of bitterness that she herself felt, her betrothed seemed completely sincere once again. Then we are resolved, Dany finished. The council will fight our enemies in the streets and in the septs while we try and move matters along with Robb Stark. The council members nodded in silent agreement. Nodding brusquely, Dany spoke once more, meeting adjourned. Tell me. The eunuch looked questionably at Prince Doran and Jon Connington, but Dany indicated that he should continue. If I cannot trust my small council, then I am truly finished. It as we thought, Your Grace, Varys said cryptically, the worst case scenario has been realized. I see. Gods help me. She looked briefly out at the city. My city, my home. I was surprised that the Magister did not mention attempting to extract financial aid from Slavers Bay, Dany remarked, looking at Varys. When he did not reply, she tilted her head in understanding. He knows. Doubtlessly, Your Grace, Varys reported instantly. Illyrio has almost as many spies in Essos as I do. It would be unthinkable that he was unaware of events taking place there. Events? Prince Doran asked, having wheeled his chair fully out onto the balcony so that he could better see the two of them. Lord Connington followed the man and stood apart, watching the proceedings with a keen interest. Dany sighed before motioning Varys to tell the others. She steeled herself for what was to follow. We have lost control of our cities in Slavers Bay, Varys reported flatly. A combination of disease, insurgents and outside armies have conspired against the small force left by Her Grace to maintain order. Our garrisons have been overwhelmed. Astapa, Yunkai and Meereen have fallen to forces both from within and outside the cities. The Maesters have reasserted their rights over the populace and rescinded all the laws made by Her Grace during her campaign. Dany fought back tears. All my work, undone in so short a time. How many died to make me the Queen of the Bay? And how many will suffer and die because I sailed west to reassert my rights over Westeros? There was an eerie silence that quickly grew oppressive. For a long moment no one spoke before Connington finally found the will to speak. Can anything be done? Nothing, Varys replied quickly. Short of sending the army back across the narrow sea, there is no recourse possible at this time. There must be some options, Doran replied cautiously. Surely there are those loyal to Her Grace within the cities who might be able to regain control. Varys shook his head. many of Her Grace's allies were killed even before the uprisings had really begun. The Sons of the Harpy in Meereen had been particularly effective in that regard. I should have had them all crucified. Dany thought bitterly. Though she knew the sentiment was pointless, she had had no idea who constituted the members of the group, much less who their leaders were. She had left standing orders for the garrison to hunt the street gang down, but it seemed that her men had been outmatched. While only a small group at the time she had left Essos, the actions of the insurgency group had sparked an inferno that had engulfed the city and fanned the flames of rebellion across Slavers Bay. Dany thought this over. I have lost everything I fought for in Essos. I had nothing not so many years ago, beyond a famous name and an abusive brother. I lost Viserys, but I fashioned the name into becoming the wife of a great Khal and the leader of an army that made the continent quiver at its approach. And, let us not forget, the mother of 3 dragons. Now though, what am I? I arrived in Westeros with the hope of conquering the lands of my father. To reclaim what should be mine. Now, though I am once again besieged by rebels within my own city with a dangerous force outside my walls. The 7 kingdoms I meant to conquer have been reduced to 3, and I am forced to betroth myself to my own nephew in order to secure half my army. All in all, an unsatisfactory state of affairs. She turned from the balcony to face the men behind her. We must push Essos from our minds at the moment, she shuddered. If I look back, I am lost. There is nothing to be done at the moment. We are barely holding on here. I cannot order the army to leave to resolve a problem halfway around the world. However, I swear by the blood of the ancestors that I will one day return to Slavers Bay and reclaim what has been taken from me by evil men. She shook her head. Though the resources of our lands in Essos will be missed, we must move forward. Varys gave a short bow. Though his face was emotionless, she could sense that he understood how hard this was for her. All is not lost, your grace, he offered. I have word that the Lost Legion, some 5,000 men at arms, has left Pentos and is sailing here as we speak. She gave a brief smile. This is indeed welcome news. Quite, Connington said sagely, though the look of worry had not yet left his eyes. We could certainly use additional men. He paused as if deciding whether to speak, though how we will afford to feed them is another matter. That is the concern of the Master of Coin. Dany retorted coldly. We are so far in debt, what is a little more? Magister Illyrio is right to be concerned, Varys said softly. The money owed by the crown has been a concern for years. Since the days of the usurper. Oh, yet more strife that wretched man left for me to deal with. I will endeavor to see if the Starks can indeed be prevailed upon to assist, Dany reminded them. The Starks are unlikely to pay for us to equip additional forces that might be used against them, Connington said sardonically. I will not ask them to, Dany answered, his tone with a hard one of her own. Any money given by the Starks will be used to pay the Iron Bank. The supplying of our own army will be a cost borne by us alone. The men nodded in agreement. Dany paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She looked at the Lord Hand. I thought that my betrothed was far more amenable to the alliance than he has been in the past. Connington returned her stare. He has been mollified by the death of the Mountain, your grace. His blood has cooled. Too easy. You have had words with him, my lord. Though the words implied a question, all present knew the truth of the matter. I did, Connington replied matter-of-factly. He indicated the seated figure of Prince Doran. As has his uncle. Prince Doran interlaced his fingers on his lap. His grace is aware of the stakes here. Indeed, he has always been so, but his anger at the wrongs done to House Targaryen and his anxiety at being a strong ruler temporarily blinded him to the bigger picture. And now? Dany asked, curious. Now he has had time to reconsider, Connington interjected. Your grace, I promise you, Aegon has always had it within him to be a good ruler, but he can be both headstrong and willful. He was enraged when he thought that Robb Stark was looking to steal the Iron Throne from his house. However, meeting the young wolf along with the deaths of Joffrey, Tommen and indeed Gregor Clegane have sobered him. How so? I impressed upon him that the deaths of the 2 young boys are not so unlike the murder of his grace's own sister, Doran said casually. While no one will mourn Joffrey, his brother was an innocent child who did not deserve his fate. I can hardly argue with that. Clegane's death in combat against my brother ensured that justice was done for certain crimes committed during the sack of King's Landing, Doran continued. Using both of these events, I was able to make the king see reason. That must have been an interesting conversation. I will not lie to you, your grace, Conington added, it was a hard road to walk. But, eventually Egon was convinced that the plan agreed by the small council and yourself was the right one. He now enthusiastically supports it. How, by the gods, did they achieve that? Dany looked in wonder at the two lords before her. One, frail, clothed in ornate thin robes ensconced within his ornate wooden wheelchair, the other a broad-chested warrior in plate armor. They couldn't have looked more different, but it appeared that they had found common cause in pushing for peace. One day you will have to tell me how that was accomplished, Dany remarked dryly. The men did not answer save to nod in acknowledgement. She paused. You say that Egon is committed to achieving an alliance with the Starks. His Grace has vowed it, Conington declared. Then I have a proposal, Dany said. What an apt choice of words. I would value your opinion on it. All three of you. It would be an honor, your Grace, Doran said solemnly. You may not think so when you hear my plan. It occurs to me, my lords, Dany returned her gaze to the city below, that merely signing a treaty of alliance with the Starks will not be enough. Not enough, your Grace? Varys echoed, confused. Quite so, Dany confirmed, we face many problems both in our lands and in this very city. We cannot afford to have a major enemy at our doors. Is that not the problem that the alliance will solve? Doran reasoned, once the treaty is signed we can move our forces into the city to deal with the malcontents, including the High Septon. The dire financial straits are also a concern, Dany reminded them all. While the Starks may be convinced to assist us, the Tyrells are far too savvy to allow themselves to cover the massive amounts owed to the Iron Bank. Not at the price of a piece of paper. I concur, Conington spoke wearily. Therefore, Dany went on, a marriage between the two factions must be arranged, to bind the Starks and Tyrells to us. But your Grace, Varys said cautiously, a marriage between the two sides is already included within the agreement. A child of Robb Stark and Margaery Tyrell will be betrothed to a child of King Aegon and yourself. If only you knew how pointless such a thing was. I am aware, Dany replied quickly, keeping her voice from breaking. However, we are potentially years away from having two children of the right gender to be betrothed, and even longer to actually allow the wedding to take place and full union of the houses to occur. She could see the three men slowly nodding as her words struck home. Therefore I propose an immediate marriage between the factions upon the signing of the treaty. Who did you have in mind, your Grace? Doran asked, his eyebrows arching in interest. Dany took a deep breath. She clasped her hand in front of her to prevent them from shaking. I would suggest that Aegon marry one of Robb Stark's sisters. I believe, Lord Varys, that you reported that Lady Sansa was with her family at Antlers. She is, Varys whispered. He cleared his throat. But, does your Grace forget, King Aegon is already promised in marriage? As if I would ever to forget that I am betrothed to mine own nephew. That agreement is the foundation of my entire army. Without it I would lose the support of Dorne and half my fighting men. That marriage will still take place. Dany forced herself to remain calm. The king will have two wives, much like the Conqueror did hundreds of years ago. At the men's shocked faces she continued, it is not so unusual for members of House Targaryen to have multiple spouses. The men before here were quiet. Deathly still. Dany gave them a moment before addressing Lord Conington. Do you believe Aegon will agree? If he does, he can maintain none of his previous animosity against the Starks. The young wolf will not stand to have his sister mistreated. Nor so will I. I imagine he would, Conington answered quietly as he thought it through, providing your Grace has no objection. Hardly, I am the one suggesting it. Dany merely nodded. What of the initial marriage pact? Doran inquired. It will still stand, Dany said, though she feared her heart would break. The child of Robb Stark will marry King Aegon's heir either from Lady Sansa or myself, whichever comes first. And I know which one that will be. Either way, a child of House Targaryen and House Stark will still sit the Iron Throne. It was the only way, Dany knew. With her lands in Essos gone, there would be no retreat. Not that I could stomach that in any event. She would either conquer Westeros and set her family in its rightful place or die in the attempt, but to do that she must have peace. There would be no fighting the Starks. They were simply too strong to be opposed without a colossal waste of life. Dany refused to allow that. I am not my father. People will not die simply so that I can have a throne. She had always intended Aegon to marry someone along with her, how else to continue the Targaryen line? Why not escalate the process and produce an heir sooner rather than later? I may not have controlled my life when I was born, or through my childhood, but I'll be damned if I am not the ruler of my destiny now. I can choose what the histories say about me, and it will be that I unified the realm and gave it peace. The men were lost in thought, though Varys was looking upon her with a look of admiration and respect. Of course, I am doing what is right for the realm rather than for myself. It's no wonder he approves. Will your grace suggest this course to the king? Lord Connington asked. I am sure my Lord Hand is more eloquent than I. Dany replied. She had no wish to be more involved in this than she was. Just because she had suggested the notion didn't mean she had to like it. I would have you talk to him immediately. As your grace commands. Connington bowed low, with your leave. Dany gestured that the Hand was permitted to go about his business. With another bow Connington left them on the balcony. The Queen took a deep, calming breath before looking at the remaining men. I have one more matter to discuss with you, Prince Doran. The aged man inclined his head. I am at your service, your grace. I meant what I said when I refused Lord Connington's suggestion of bringing Myrcella Baratheon into the Red Keep. She is much safer where she is, especially if the High Septon is using her a pawn in his own squalid game. I am thankful, your grace, Doran said as he gave her a puzzled look, yet I suspect there is something more. Dany gave him a knowing look. Lord Varys informs me that you intend to bring Myrcella into the city. To the Great September itself, in fact. The Prince of Dorne's face became a mask. One moment he appeared as a kindly old man, the next he revealed his other side, the manipulator and strategist. He looked from Varys to Dany's, his face wary. There is no cause for alarm, your grace, Doran said carefully. Lady Myrcella has asked that she attend the funeral of her brother since your graces were kind enough to allow the faith to conduct the rites in the Great September so that her mother can be present. You thought to keep this secret? Dany asked accusingly. From the small council. From me. The prince's expression did not change. Your grace, I beg your indulgence, but it seemed the simpler course. I would not increase the risk to Myrcella. Risk? Dany frowned, but she could see the truth. Doran believes, as Varys does, that the deaths of Joffrey and Tommen were no mere accidents or coincidences. Doran gave her a sly smile. I value the girl's life, your grace. She is betrothed to my son. We all value the girl's life, Varys noted softly. The young are precious indeed. The deaths of the Baratheon children is a tragedy. None of us would wish that to continue on the Lady Myrcella. It won't be, Doran declared firmly, his face hardening. Not while I have anything to do with it. We do not hurt little girls in Dorne. She is my ward, regardless of her parentage. I will protect her. How do you intend to do that at the Great September? Dany asked. She will be surrounded by sparrows and other rebels. She will have a proper escort, Doran answered. Not only will 100 men at arms accompany her, but she will also have my nieces with her, as well as my brother, who will lead the delegation across the city. The Red Viper. It would have to be a brave man indeed who would be willing to cross swords with the man who bested the mountain. Very well, Dany replied, though I shall have Grey Worm bring a detachment of Unsullied within a stone's throw of the September. Prince Oberyn should feel free to call upon them if needed. Your grace is king and generous. Doran bowed his head. Not as generous as you suppose. I have a request that I wish you to relay to Myrcella, Dany said, if you would be so kind. It would be an honor, your grace. I wish House Lannister to relinquish any claim it has to the throne and forgive the crown's debt. I would have Myrcella talk to her mother in order for a proclamation to be issued to that effect. Lord Varys here, she gestured to the eunuch, will be discussing this matter through with Lord Tyrion. In exchange for the girl's and her family's compliance, the Iron Throne will confirm and approve the betrothal of Myrcella to your son Tristan. Furthermore, Cersei and Tyrion Lannister will be released from imprisonment. They will be exiled from the Seven Kingdoms, but otherwise they will be granted their freedom. What of the Westerlands? Doran asked. Doubtless the imp and his sister will ask what is to happen to their family's lands. Ask Robb Stark. It's under his control at the moment. That will be decided at a later date, but, seeing as how they will be exiled, it is of no concern to them. I'm sure Lady Myrcella will agree to those terms. Doran mused. Varys was troubled. However, the Faith are likely to still cause trouble regardless of whether Myrcella convinces her mother. No doubt Dany spat. However, if when they argue that our word is dirt, I would much rather that, when we call that a lie, it is the truth. Our offer here is genuine. The Lannisters renounce the crown and the debt, and they are free to leave Westeros in peace. That is my final offer to them. And well worth the risk of allowing Myrcella within the clutches of the High Septon. Chapter 65, Margaery 9. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The old man poked and prodded her belly, occasionally adjusting his fingers to gently touch another area. Slowly he lowered his head and pressed his ear to her stomach, pausing to listen to the heartbeat of the unborn child within. Margaery instinctively held her breath, trying to make it easier for the Grand Maester to hear the pulse of life that emanated from her infant. The Maester lifted his head and chucked softly, "There's no need for that, Your Grace. Your child's heartbeat is so strong it's a wonder we don't hear it while we're talking." The Queen smiled at the man's words. "I prefer to give you all the assistance I can, Grand Maester." Lewyn stepped away from the bed, giving her a mocking bow. "I am most grateful, Your Grace, and appreciative. I am not as young as I once was. My hearing does tend to fail at times." "Yes," Margaery commented kindly, "and usually when it's most convenient for you." The man offered her a broad grin as he turned away to allow the Queen to get dressed with a modicum of privacy. Unbidden, the Queen's handmaidens came away from the tent walls and quickly had their mistress properly attired. "Well?" she asked as she was assisted to her feet. The Maester half turned as if uncertain whether to face the Queen until it was confirmed she was ready. "A curious reaction. He's been seeing me in a state of undress for months." Lewyn glanced at Myra Forrester, who was pouring her mistress a goblet of water. At the Northern girl's nod of encouragement, the Maester turned fully to address the Queen. "There is no need to be concerned, Your Grace. As far as I can tell, you are both in excellent health," Lewyn informed her. "However, I am concerned with the length of time it is taking for the baby to arrive." "No more concerned than I," Margaery retorted, placing her hand onto her hips and stretching her back. "Just moving around is now becoming a chore." "I sympathize, Your Grace," Lewyn said with an empathetic smile. "As I have advised before, if one of your handmaidens or your Sepper could rub your—" Margaery waved him off. "I am quite well, thank you. My husband sees to all my needs." The man blinked. "Your husband, Your Grace? You mean the king?" She arched an eyebrow playfully. "I have only one husband, Maester Lewyn. Robb is most willing to assist in whatever I want." She smiled again, this time ruefully. "As well he should. It is his fault I am in such a state." His fault? She wasn't sure, but she was sure the man was blushing slightly. "Well," Margaery conceded thoughtfully, "maybe half the fault is his, but he can take the blame. It's the very least he can do given the ordeal I'm enduring." Off to one side, Margaery heard Saya giggling at the Queen's jest. "Fault aside, Your Grace," Lewyn said, returning to the point, "you are both healthy. However, the length of your pregnancy is becoming an issue. I would like to give you some potions that are thought to encourage childbirth." She frowned. "They will not hurt the child, will they, Grand Maester?" "Oh no, Your Grace." Lewyn was quick to reassure her. "They are just thought to encourage the baby to come into the world. If the baby is not ready, then nothing will coax it. At worst the potions will be unsuccessful and nothing will happen, but I believe it to be worth a try." The Queen considered. "Very well, Grand Maester. I am in your hands. Provide your remedies to my handmaidens and I will take them." "Thank you, Your Grace." Lewyn bowed before his Queen. As he straightened, he spoke once more. "I would also advise Your Grace to reconsider my proposal for you to travel to Antlers for the birth. It is problematic for you to deliver a child in an army encampment." "I thought you said it was unsafe for me to travel," Margaery said, feigning confusion. The Maester was not fooled. "As you know, Your Grace, I was referring to making long journeys, not the short distance to the nearby castle." "Nearby or not, my place is with the king," Margaery replied stubbornly. "I will give birth with the king nearby and his army on hand to pledge their allegiance to the heir to the throne." "Your Grace, I would urge you to—" "Grand Maester," Margaery cut in, sharply, "my brother, grandmother, good mother and husband have all been unsuccessful in their attempts to convince me to leave the camp. What makes you think you will succeed where they have failed? Rugged obstinacy, the maester replied, though his sad smile conceded that he had lost the argument. She reached up and touched his arm. I promise you, Grand Maester, I am not some silly girl who has not thought this through. There are very good reasons to be here. Besides which, I am quite comfortable and as warm as I would be in any castle. As long as you have everything you need. I do, your grace, the old man said grudgingly. The king's mother and your grandmother have been most diligent in ensuring that we are adequately supplied from the maester's stores at Antlers. Even the Blackfish has sent salves and balms from Riverrun. Most kind of him, Margaery noted with a grin. Good to know that everyone. Seven hells. A voice rang out from the tent's other chamber. How long am I to be kept in suspense? Robb. Leave her alone. She's still talking to the maester, give her a moment. Bugger that. If they want to have a cozy chat about the weather they can do it on their own time. Now it was Margaery's turn to giggle. You can come in, my love, she called out, I'm decent. I doubt that, Robb Stark said, moving aside the rail that served as a partition between the two sections of the tent. He stepped through the gap in the canvas. He was about to speak when a grey blur bounded past him and ran at Margaery, circling the queen's legs in quick, frantic circles. Gods be good, Grey whined. Margaery cried, running her hands through the fur of the gigantic wolf, it's like you haven't seen me in a month. He's just anxious, Robb said, stepping in close to kiss her lightly on the lips, as am I. He glanced at Lewin. I was not aware that the Grand Maester was making a visit today. I asked Myra to find him after breakfast, Margaery explained. I knew you were busy examining the latest recruits to the Wolf Guard and didn't want to add something else to your already troubled mind. This is exactly the sort of thing that should be on my mind, Robb commented with more than a hint of annoyance. He took her hands in his own and kissed the knuckles as his eyes flickered with concern. Is something wrong? Nothing, my love, nothing. Margaery assured him, stroking his cheek with one of her hands. It's just I haven't felt the baby move since yesterday afternoon. Given the little one's tendency to perform somersaults throughout the day, I was a little worried. She looked over to Maester Lewin, who was smiling encouragingly. Fortunately the Grand Maester was on hand and was willing to examine me. It was nothing, your grace, Lewin said calmly as he looked at Robb, and I will tell you what I told your wife. Young man, your baby appears to be completely healthy. It is probably just resting, hopefully preparing itself to come into the world. Gods be good, Robb whispered. More loudly he asked, do you have everything you need here? We can always call for extra maesters or servants or... I have everything I need, your grace, Lewin replied firmly but with kindness in his eyes. I assure your grace that, should I need anything, I will ask. Are you certain? Maester Lewin delivered you, Robb, as well as all your brothers and sisters, Catelyn Stark chided him from just behind the canvas screen. He knows what he is doing. Leave the man be. Robb looked contrite. I meant no offense, Grand Maester. And none was taken, your grace, Lewin promised. He shifted a satchel containing his potions and equipment onto his shoulder. Now if you don't mind. There are others who need my attention. Of course, Maester Lewin, of course. As the Maester stepped out of the tent he looked back. I have left today's messages on your table, your grace. Just send a servant to me when you wish to send a reply. With the Maester gone, the king turned back to regard his wife. I can't tell you how relieved I am that you're all right. When I saw that Lewin had been called, I feared that birth had begun and that I might have missed it. You've been gone 2 hours, Robb, Catelyn scoffed. That is hardly enough time for childbirth. Robb blushed slightly. He looked at his feet. I made a mistake. This is my first time after all. Catelyn had moved to the opening in the partition and was looking exasperatedly at her son. Margaery's handmaidens were giggling at the king's discomfort. To his credit, Robb merely took the women's mirth with a self-deprecating smile as he idly scuffed his boots. At times I forget how young he is. How young we both are. In any event, your concern was unnecessary, she told him, accepting the goblet from Myra, taking a sip as she moved away into the main section of the tent. I am quite well. Her hand dropped to her belly, as is the little one inside me. Good, Robb said quietly, looking at her in worry. Her husband's concern was touching, but she felt a small flare of annoyance from deep within her. I am not some sculpture that will crack with the slightest pressure. As Margaery thought it, she remonstrated herself for the unfairness of her mind. This is simply a battle that Robb cannot fight. It leaves him feeling helpless. She smiled at him as she went to hug Lady Catelyn, who returned her look after they parted from the embrace. Attempting to distract her husband, Margaery stepped away and sat on a chair around the map table. "I did not think to see you here, mother. I thought you were set on a return to Antlers. Sansa and I have decided, after giving it some more thought, that we should stay here for the time being," Catelyn informed them, taking a seat on the other side of the table. "We will stay with you until you have had your child." She smiled at Robb's puzzled look before looking again at Margaery. "I believe your grandmother has resolved to do likewise." "Seven hells," Robb cursed, "is almost my entire family to be housed here." He was frowning. "This is an army camp, mother, not an inn for travelers to stay the night or come as they go as they please." "I agree," Catelyn answered determinedly, "but my good daughter is about to give birth to my first grandchild. I will not sit idly in a castle enjoying the comforts of the highborn while my family sleep out in the open and my son's heir is born in a field." Margaery was sure that she detected the hint of a rebuke in her good mother's voice. She wasn't surprised. Her entire family was against her being here and had continually pressed for her to return to the safety and security of Antlers, the nearest castle occupied by the Starks. Try as they might, Margaery would not be moved on the issue. "My place is by my husband's side. I cannot leave him to conduct the treaty discussions on his own. With the Spider and the Dragon Queen on hand, he's likely to give up half our lands without realizing it, most likely because of some absurd notion of honor." Again, Margaery knew she was being unfair. Robb was far smarter than she had originally supposed. She could see that Robb had disengaged from the discussion and had wandered over to his own desk and had started to pick his way through the veritable mountain of messages he had received. Evidently he was willing for his mother and wife to do battle on the issue without his interference. A good commander knows when to pick his battles. "Well, your being here is a continued delight," Margaery said sincerely to Catelyn. "And I look forward to spending time with Sansa. I have never had a sister of my own, so getting to know her will be wonderful. I hope that, in time, we will become the best of friends." "She feels likewise, Your Grace," Catelyn replied. "At last," Robb muttered excitedly. Margaery and Catelyn turned to regard him. The Queen was surprised to see him smiling as he finished one scroll and picked up another. "Good news." "Some of the best," Robb said eagerly as he looked over the top of the new scroll he was holding. "My father engaged and destroyed the Bolton army in open battle just east of Winterfell. Roose Bolton and his son are among the dead, and what's left of their force flees back towards the Dread Fort and Carhold. Father's forces are moving up to begin siege preparations." Margaery's eyes flashed as she recalled that awful moment when Roose Bolton, clad in black armor with a pink cloak, had smiled malevolently at her husband in the Great Hall of the Twins. The man's treachery had been a nightmare then, with his evil intentions for the royal couple revealed in the dim torchlight of the banquet hall. While they had been saved by loyal men and women, others had paid a steep price for the Boltons' treachery, and the North had suffered under the yoke of tyranny ever since. Now, though the nightmare was over, the king indicated the discarded letter. "That is not all. Lord Forrester has joined forces with his son and taken the Rills. Lord Ryswell has been killed in the fighting." Gregor then struck westwards onto the stony shore to mop up the last elements of Ironborn in that area. "Father reports that when that's done, the entire western force will march north to liberate Deepwood Motte." He smiled grimly. "With the siege and capture of Deepwood along with the Dread Fort and Carhold, the campaign in the north will be concluded." "And your father?" Catelyn asked urgently, the questions coming forth in a rush. "Is he all right? What of your brothers?" Robb had turned and picked up another message that was still sealed. It bore the seal of the Warden of the North, the direwolf of House Stark. "Father bids me give this to you. This should explain matters." Her anxiety caused Catelyn to quickly take the parchment from Robb's hands. Within an instant she had cracked the seal, unfurled the message and began to devour the contents, turning away as she did so. Margaery looked at Robb for understanding, but her husband just offered her an encouraging grin as well as a wink. Leaving Catelyn with a modicum of privacy, the Queen returned to other matters. "Does your father say when he will have completed the campaign?" "No," Robb admitted. "Sieging the castles presents some difficulties. Deepwood will likely be relatively easy, but taking the Dread Fort could take months. Maybe, with their lord and his heir dead, the men inside can be convinced to surrender. Margaery suggested hopefully. Perhaps, Robb replied, uncertainty filling his voice. But I suspect father will give them one opportunity to yield. If they fail to avail themselves of that, they will be wiped out to the last man. Margaery struggled with the idea of such a cold declaration, an odd attitude considering you yourself hung a great number of Freys for their treachery, but she knew the Starks were more than capable of barbaric behavior when the situation warranted. Despite their cold demeanor and reputation, she knew that Lord Stark and his son were loving people, as warm as a summer sun. Cross them, however, and the sun would disappear beyond the horizon as if it had never been, leaving behind nothing but the cold, icy countenance of the north. Eyeing his mother to watch her progress through her father's letter, Robb picked up another scroll and broke the seal that bound it. In silence his eyes dropped to the letter and he began to read. Deciding that now was the time to take a brief respite, Margaery motioned to her servants to prepare her clothes for the day. In ordinary circumstances it would be shameful that the sun was almost at its highest and she was not yet properly attired. Damn those that think such things. Shameful indeed. Let them carry around the heir to the throne and we'll talk some more. The queen had almost returned to her canvas bedchamber before her husband let forth an almighty curse. Others take me. The impudence of it all. Who the fuck do these people think they are? Alarmed by the king's outburst, Margaery returned to see what the matter was now. The girl entered the tent cautiously, nervous at the fact that the king had summoned her. She performed a perfect curtsy as soon as she saw the royal couple seated at the table. She dropped low and held the pose, waiting for a command to rise. Robb looked up from the scroll he was reading. Oh, don't be ridiculous, Sansa, get up. Such formalities are not for family. Cautiously Sansa rose to look at the king and queen. She blinked as if not recognizing her brother. I suppose he can be quite formidable for those that don't know him, and his sister has not seen a lot of him this past year. In the intervening time he has been hailed a king, a leader of a mighty army. For a moment she seemed to be uncertain of her place, even though Margaery offered her a broad smile. There was a pause before Sansa's mother spoke from her own chair from the left of Robb. Sit down, Sansa, there's nothing to be anxious about. Barely disguising a sign of relief, Sansa approached the large table and slid into one of the high-backed wooden chairs set opposite the king. She placed her hands in her lap where the fingers worried at a loose thread of her dress. Poor girl, she has never quite come to terms with the fact that her own actions got her father arrested and many of the Stark household killed. Though many have tried to speak to her about it, to explain that it was not her fault, she carries a heavy burden and a feeling of guilt around with her as palpable as a set of heavy chains. Robb nodded firmly and put the scroll down on the table in front of him. He eyed at his mother and indicated she should speak. We have received letters from your father in the north, Lady Catelyn said, almost breathlessly. The army of House Bolton has been destroyed and our enemies are in retreat. And father? Sansa asked nervously. He's fine, Catelyn promised her daughter, got through the battle with nary a scratch the way he tells it. Her good mother's tone indicated that she thought little of her husband's reassurance that he was fine. Margaery sympathized. Robb often downplays the severity of any injuries as well. But that is not the end of it, Catelyn went on smiling. Rickon was being held hostage by Roose Bolton as Shorty against an attack. Your father sent Howland Reed and a number of his Crannog men to retrieve him. He's safe, unharmed and back with your father. Tears of gratitude started to fill Sansa's eyes before she looked up quickly. What about Bran? The smile on Catelyn's face faltered. That is somewhat less clear. Rickon has told your father that, after the burning of Winterfell, Bran and Rickon traveled together towards the wall. They were accompanied by Hodder, the children of Howland Reed, and a Wilderling woman. On the way north, Bran sent Rickon and the woman to Skagos, saying that the route ahead was too dangerous and that they needed to separate. That's all Rickon knows of him. Sansa stared wide-eyed. She did not speak for a moment. Can the Wilderling woman not say anything? She's dead, Catelyn said regretfully. Roose Bolton's bastard killed her as she tried to defend your brother. If it's the woman I think it is, Robb noted, then I did her an awful disservice. She was a member of a wilding party that found its way to the woods around Winterfell. Theon and I killed the rest and took her captive. When last I saw her she was being used as a servant in our halls. He paused, pondering. For all that though, she honored her promise of loyalty and died for our brother. We must ensure she is nor forgotten. The girl on the far side of the table gave a brief nod. What will father do about Bran? He has said that he will finish dealing with the rebels who still hold some of our lands. When he's finished he will head north in search of Bran. There was a curious inflection in Catelyn's tone, Margaery noted. As if she was angry for some reason with Lord Eddard, especially with his determination to head to the wall in search of answers. Must have something to do with the possibility that it will mean that her husband will, most likely, cross paths with his bastard son. Robb has told me that his mother had always disliked the boy. I can't say I blame her. Margaery looked at Robb. How would I feel if my husband slept with another woman and then compounded the betrayal by presenting me with a bastard to raise alongside my own true-born children? Rumor has it that Catelyn had tried to send the boy away several times but that Eddard Stark would not hear of it. I dare say I would react to the situation no better than she. Still, if she wants to find her other son it would appear she has no choice but to accept it. Silence seemed to descend on the group for a moment. Each of them seemed preoccupied with their own thoughts. It was Robb that broke the silence. That is not the only message we have received today, he started uneasily. Oh. Sansa said, her brother's words interrupting her thoughts. Indeed, Robb shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He took a deep breath. The Targaryens have suggested that we amend the proposed treaty to include an additional marriage pact. From Sansa's puzzled look Margaery could see that the girl had not worked out what the implications of that were. I thought your children were to be wed. Perhaps you better spell things out, my love, Margaery whispered softly to her husband, it might makes this easier. Robb took another breath. Queen Daenerys has suggested, that along with the betrothal between our child to one of Daenerys and Aegon's, a pact we can only realize in the future, that we formalize the treaty now with a different marriage. Namely that of you and Aegon, Catelyn cut in sharply. Sansa looked dumbstruck. They want me to be queen. Margaery repressed a smile. And she thought such ideas were done when she escaped Joffrey's mad clutches. That is what they propose, Catelyn answered quietly. Not quite, Robb said, a little too loud, they wish you to be Aegon's second queen. His intention to marry Daenerys still stands. Hardly surprising, if grandmother's reports are accurate. The Targaryens are bitterly divided between the two factions. A marriage may be the only way to unify them. Sansa seemed shocked. Then she frowned as if remembering something from her histories. Targaryens did that all the time, didn't they? Marry more than one person. It was not as common as people think, though it was certainly an aspect of the Valyrian freehold, Margaery replied. However, after the conquest, House Targaryen more or less abandoned the practice. A concession to the faith. Seems that when you have dragons, you can do whatever you want. Robb added darkly. You're unhappy, Your Grace, Sansa observed plainly with a disarming innocence. It is an insult to our house and you personally, Robb thundered before he caught himself. Margaery was quick to intercede. Doubtless it was not meant as such, and, on the face of it, the idea has merit as it would make the alliance more tangible. To be a second wife. Robb nearly exploded in rage, though Margaery knew it was not directed at her or any present. The old gods and new don't agree on much, but they agree on this: marriage is between one man and one woman. Robb shook with anger before he finally calmed himself. With an effort he cleared his throat. In any event, it makes no difference what I think. There are only two opinions that matter on this subject. He looked across the table. One is yours. Sansa, what do you think of all this? Sansa looked down and thought about for a moment. The girl is more intelligent than she lets on. No quick answer, a play for time when she considers her options. Margaery looked between Sansa and Robb. What would I think if I was in this position? At least when father suggested I married Renly, I had the benefit of at least meeting him beforehand. Sansa faces the prospect of being sold off to a man she had never even seen, much less met. After a pause she raised her head. If it is determined that my duty is to marry the Dragon King, then I will of course obey. Her brother looked dissatisfied. But is that what you want? How can she answer that? There are too many variables. Don't be shy or polite, Sansa, Catelyn interjected earnestly. Tell your brother the truth. Rob frowned in confusion, but before he could speak Sangza had turned to face him with clear shining eyes. "No, it is not what I want," the girl spoke up fiercely, "not at all. And I beg you not to make me do it." The girl was breathing deeply as if shocked by her own outburst. The king blinked in abject astonishment. Margaery too was surprised. She had spent a little time with Sangza and not once would she have suspected that she was capable of such vehemence. "May I ask your reasons?" Rob said softly. Sangza closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Without warning she opened them again. "I have feelings for, and would be married to, another man." There was a slight pause. "I'm sure King Aegon is a good and kind man," the words were coming in a rush now, "and I would be a dutiful wife, but I do not want this match." The girl's face was hard, unbending. In that moment, Margaery saw the stubbornness and unyielding nature of the North. She may look